Hey guys, picture this. You've just donned your finest tunic, fumbled with your plumed hat, and are about to serenade your beloved outside her window, only to realize that you're in a rain-soaked trench and your loot is infested with lice. Welcome to medieval dating life, where romance meets raw survival in the least hygienic of playgrounds. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. In the shadowy alleyways and candlelit halls of medieval Europe, courtship was an extreme sport. Forget modern dating apps. Your prospects hinged on feudal allegiance, dowry negotiations, and whether your relatives owed someone a favor. Imagine swiping right only to realize your potential match is betrothed to a rival baron. The stakes were high. A successful union meant consolidating power, preserving land, and maybe scoring a few barrels of ale. Fail, and you were stuck nursing wounded pride in muddy boots. But before you could even attempt to woo someone, you had to survive the horrifying basics of everyday life. Public baths were rare. Water was often contaminated, and soap was a luxury reserved for nuns and very, very wealthy folks. So the first challenge of medieval romance was simply avoiding the morning blast from your own stink. Hint, carrying a sprig of rosemary in your lapel was less about fashion and more about convincing your date that you hadn't been rolling in pig manure that morning. Once you'd navigated the hygiene minefield, you ventured into the awkward ritual of gift-giving. Today, roses and chocolates might seal the deal. Back then, the token of affection could be anything from a pressed flower tucked into a missive to an entire cow slaughtered in your beloved's honor, if you had the cash and the clout. But more often, impoverished knights and troubadours settled for crafting elaborate poems on parchment, wrapped in goose quills that invariably bled ink all over the place. Nothing says I love you like blotchy, unreadable handwriting. And then there were the serenades, nighttime performances under windows, accompanied by the plaintive strum of a lute. If you got lucky, you'd avoid the patrol of town guards. If not, you'd either be fined for disturbing the peace or mistaken for a burglar and tossed in the stocks. Hope your song choice was worth it. There was a delicate balance between touching the heart and touching off a five-piece guard squad. But let's not forget the absurd tests of affection often imposed by overzealous parents or devout priests. In some regions, a suitor had to undergo a mock ordeal by fire to prove his devotion, essentially walking over hot coals while reciting prayers without twitching. In others, they faced a trial by water. If they sank, they were deemed innocent and likely drowned. But if they floated, well, they were guilty of witchcraft or something equally disastrous. Either way, it was a lose-lose proposition that truly tested how much you valued love, though admittedly low odds for survival don't scream forever after. Assuming you survived the archaic obstacle course, you entered the inner sanctum of chaperoned meetings. Chaperons ranged from stern relatives to elderly maids who watched your every move with the zeal of a customs officer. A single stray glance or too long handshake could be reported back to your date's father, faster than you could say quid pro quo. And should you slip up, you might be forced into a medieval version of the talk, an awkward lecture on chastity belts, and divine judgment that left you praying for the sweet release of the bubonic plague. Despite all this, medieval daters had their moments of genuine tenderness. Some couples exchanged heart-shaped trinkets carved from bone, yes, bone, and wrote passionate letters sealed with wax stamps. These letters were smuggled through secret passageways or hidden in hollowed-out loaves of bread, because if the baker caught you, not only was your letter confiscated, but your bread might end up with a suspiciously crusty spot where your love note once lay. Then came the grand pilgrimages, epic journeys undertaken by lovers to holy shrines in hopes of divine approval. Imagine backpacking 300 miles to the shrine of Saint Valentine, barefoot in freezing rain, all while reciting love psalms to ensure your union was blessed. If you survived bandits, wild wolves, and chronic foot rot, you'd present your offerings, often a lock of hair or a simple ring, to the shrine, praying your ordeal proved your devotion to both God and your sweetheart. Yet, for every romantic pilgrimage, there was an equal and opposite absurdity. In some corners of Christendom, couples participated in love lotteries, where single men and women drew names from a pot at festive gatherings. The pair chosen had to spend the next month bound by a love token, effectively a rudimentary cuckold alert system where everyone knew you were pledged to someone, but had no idea how that someone would behave. Please, remove your mind from the gutter, though granted, sometimes it was the gutter that made the whole enterprise so entertaining. As the marriage negotiations loomed, so did dowries, a currency that transcended mere coin. A prospective bride's dowry might include land, livestock, or ignorance of her mother-in-law's temper tantrums. Though the last wasn't legally enforceable, the groom's family looked for virtues such as noble birth, lineage, and the ability to rouse a group of peasants to clear a field without accidentally burning down the village. And so the grand marriage contract was drafted, a legal document longer than the Magna Carta, stipulating who got what when the happy couple inevitably inherited the bubonic plague together. But let us not romanticize too much. Medieval spouses often discovered that wedlock was less happily ever after and more holy matrimony, holy misery. Consider the humble peasant girl married off at 15. Her dowry might be a goat and a promise that her new husband would be obligated to visit his mother on Sundays. Meanwhile, the new husband, aged 30 and sporting a permanent limp from a jousting accident, hoped his bride knew how to mend chainmail and scrounge enough grain to stave off famine. And then there was the practice of trial marriage, or hand fasting in Celtic traditions. Couples bound themselves together for a year and a day, like a medieval HBO miniseries, Game of Thrones, the 1-year contract. If they survived the term without someone being murdered or contracting typhus, they declared themselves husband and wife. Otherwise, they just parted ways after a year's worth of shared debts and biting midges. Of course, we can't overlook the gruesome aspect of medieval intimacy. Childbirth was essentially a gladiatorial contest, with mortality rates rivaling any lethal sports entertainment. Expectant mothers faced the very real possibility of hemorrhage, infection, or being auctioned off to the convent if the pregnancy was deemed inconvenient. Thus, lovers locked in what we nostalgically call married bliss had to contend with the specter of mortality at every turn, hardly the sort of mood lighting we're used to in modern rom-coms. Yet somehow, fluttering hearts persisted. The medieval soul craved companionship as fiercely as it feared rats in the castle keep. Street markets saw the merchants hawking aphrodisiac potions, often nothing more than ground pomegranate peel mixed with stale mead, that promised to rekindle passion or at least mask the stench of a 3-day fast. Meanwhile, in taverns, bawdy poems were recited by drunken minstrels, extolling the virtues of strong arms and even stronger ales, reminding listeners that love and alcohol have a very long, messy history together. As we reach the end of our first chapter, let's pause to admire the absurd comedy of it all. Medieval dating life was a carnival of cruelty, humor, and unexpected tenderness, a place where you might serenade your love to death by lice, spend a month ridding yourself of bandits, and then be politely reminded by the local priest that you'd failed to mention your ex's embarrassing scandal. It was a nightmare that somehow, paradoxically, felt like home. In our next segment, we'll dig deeper into the stranger-than-fiction traditions, the masked balls where nobles tested each other's wit, the floral language that left even the most eloquent scribes in tears, and the trial by chess match, because nothing says I choose you like capturing a king. So sharpen your quills, polish your mail armor, and ready your sarcastic wit, because the journey is only getting more absurd from here. Welcome back, brave souls, to our relentless plunge into the medieval mating mere, where courtship games came with jousting lances, floral emojis were literal bouquets, and your reputation could vanish faster than fresh roasted boar at a village feast. In part 2, we'll tumble headlong into the most outlandish rituals and clandestine ceremonies that defined dating when hygiene was optional, scandal was mandatory, and survival was the ultimate aphrodisiac. First, the masquerade, masks, mischief, and mutual mayhem. When dukes and duchesses grew tired of staring at each other's haggard visages, they invented the masked ball, a pretense for flirting behind layers of velvet and papier-mâché. Picture an echoing great hall illuminated by torches, the air thick with smoke from peat fires, and nobles drifting in gowns weighed down by countless yards of fabric. For the briefest of nights, names and titles were forgotten, replaced by fanciful pseudonyms like Lady Nightshade or the Crimson Spectre. Behind these masks, true intentions could take flight. A dashing chevalier might slip a silk ribbon to a coy lady, only for her to vanish into the crowds, leaving him grasping at empty air and a possibly stolen mask. Meanwhile, the scroll keepers recorded these alter egos in diaries, illegible until the 22nd century, mapping an intricate web of secret rendezvous. But don't be fooled. With every stolen kiss came the peril of being unmasked, literally, exposed the wrong face, and you risked a duel at dawn or social exile, which in medieval terms meant being forced to hear the local priest wax poetic about your shortcomings every Sunday. Dusra, the language of flowers, petal by petal, proposals. Forget roses red and violets blue. Medieval lovers mastered a far more convoluted floral lexicon. To hand someone a red carnation might whisper, "I burn for you," while a lavender sprig practically screamed, "Send money, I'm freezing." Devout suitors studied the Floragraphia manuscripts, ink-smudged tomes that cataloged the secret meanings of hundreds of blossoms. A misstep could be disastrous. Present a crescent-shaped lily, and you'd be denouncing their fleeting purity. Laying down a sprig of juniper? Congratulations, you've just accused them of immoral sorcery. Courtiers held clandestine flower swap gatherings in secluded gardens, exchanging bouquets under moonlight and decoding each arrangement with trembling, half-literate shudders. Some families even employed professional floriatrics, women who specialized in crafting cryptic compositions designed to delight lovers or diplomatically quell jealous rivals. It was like Tinder meets botanical wizardry, except if you swiped wrong, you might end up betrothed to the wrong cousin or publicly shamed for witchcraft. Moondrum, the goblet game, sips of truth and poison. In a society that worshipped fealty above all, professing undying love begged the question, how do I know it's genuine? Enter the goblet game, a courtly ritual equal parts tequila shot and lie detector. 2 participants would each take turns sipping from identical cups. One was innocuous wine, the other laced with a mild emetic or hallucinogen. The idea was that true lovers wouldn't vomit at the sight of each other's affection, because love conquers all, while the deceitful would be exposed by the cup's betrayal. High-ranking nobles held these taste tests behind rose-arched pavilions, guarded by stoic knights who recorded every gag and hiccup. If both parties survived without incident, they exchanged a kissing cup, a ceremonial goblet engraved with their initials, a medieval version of a friendship bracelet, but significantly more germ-laden. Of course, rumors swirled of unscrupulous servants swapping cups on the sly, leading to tragicomic scenes of purloined poison and headstrong barons spewing red wine across the dais as their petitioned spouse clapped politely, unsure whether to call for water or poison removal. Fourth, trial by chess, checkmate your way to a betrothal. Not content with duels of steel or strength, some regions introduced the trial by chess, a contest of strategy where lovers faced off across a board to prove their worthiness. The stakes? Winning opponent's hand in marriage, or losing and being forced into a convent or monastery to atone for your hubris. The game took place in solemn chambers lined with oaken panels, where silence was enforced by petrified onlookers. Competitors donned scholarly robes and gazed intently at carved ivory pieces. Each move weighed as heavily as life's most significant decisions. Variants included expeditio matrimonialis, where each captured piece represented a social impediment. The rook symbolized familial disapproval, the knight stood for personal reputation, and the queen, well, capturing her meant utter humiliation. For titillated audiences, the drama rivaled any stage play. Gasps at gambits, derisive coughs when a pawn was lost, and clandestine wagers on whether the knightly suitor could channel his inner Kasparov. Eindavde, pure blood or peasant, the great social divide. No discussion of medieval courtship could omit the rigid caste lines. Noble women of impeccable lineage expected suitors to trace their pedigree back to at least the Norman conquest, or face ghastly punishment involving an unflattering mention in the family chronicle. Meanwhile, lower classes fell prey to the less romantic, more pragmatic, hand-fasting agreements. If you could haul enough kindling to the hearth, you proved your commitment. If not, your partner decamped to the next sweatshop. Fiefdom without a backward glance. In borderlands and frontier keeps, desperate bachelors sometimes joined the marriage crusade. They donned crusaders' crosses, marched to the Holy Land, and hoped to return with a bride imported from exotic lands, plus the cachet of Hygiene Saracen siege engines. Success meant instant prestige. Failure meant being hailed a wanderer and forced to marry a local with more children than land. It was essentially the medieval version of Find Love on the Other Side of the World, except with more sword scars and fewer travel vlogs. Aravade, the seduction of song, troubadours and tablature, while lute strummers and the common folk tuned their strings to lament lost loves. At court, professional troubadours were enlisted as love subcontractors. Imagine hiring Ed Sheeran if he also doubled as your financial advisor and occasional hitman. These minstrels wove intricate ballads extolling the virtues of your chosen one, praising her golden hair or his valor on the battlefield. If well composed, the song earned you social capital. If botched, you became a cautionary tale for future admirers. Troubadours traveled the circuit, hopping from castle to castle, their repertories growing dangerously long. A poorly timed lyric, such as referencing a lady's rumored liver complaint, could result in a knife fight or immediate expulsion under guard. Skilled composers kept extensive exclusion lists to avoid mentioning existing lovers, rival families, or politically inconvenient puns. The greatest heroes of this craft commanded steep fees, sometimes as much as a year's worth of barley, while their less talented peers eked out survival playing for coin at village alehouses, where the mix of tipsy patrons and ear-splitting songs often devolved into riotous beer-fueled brawls. 7. Potion peddlers. From love elixirs to lethal lotions, the medieval marketplace bristled with vendors hawking amatory potions guaranteed to ignite passion. These brews typically contained ground mandrake root, poppy extract, and questionable bits of unicorn horn, actually powdered walrus tusk. Ritual instructions demanded a nocturnal application beneath the moonlight, lest the concoction lose potency or animate a nearby cat into prophetic meowing. Beware, however, the boundary between desire-inducing draft and cataleptic curse was wafer-thin. A single mismeasurement could render your beloved comatose, charged with witchcraft, or permanently in love with your donkey. Licensed apothecaries required extensive apprenticeships, but unlicensed charlatans proliferated, disguised as traveling picadors or tattered monks, selling lures that ranged from mildly laxative to outright toxic. Unsuspecting grooms unwittingly dosed their brides, leading to heartbreak, exorcisms, and a stern admonishment from the parish priest to stop chasing mortal pleasure and seek salvation. Etavde, the pledge of the dawn, breakfast, promises, and morning regrets. If you survived nights of revelry, the true trial began at dawn. Lovers who pledged vows under candlelight were bound by the pledge of the dawn, a binding promise to present a token at sunrise. A lock of hair, a scrap of lace, or a freshly killed rooster if you were particularly show-offy. Failure to deliver meant public shaming, your name carved onto a wooden effigy perched outside the church, where townsfolk could pelt you with stale bread and rotten fruit. These morning rituals enforced accountability, but also fueled comic tragedies. Imagine galloping home at first light, breastplate clanking, only to discover your prize cock had been commandeered by an overeager tenant farmer. You'd arrive empty-handed, breathless, and face the withering gaze of both your beloved and half the village. Some suitors tried creative alternatives, presenting 2 hens and claiming one was heraldic in color. But the church frowned on meaningless substitutions, insisting only proper tokens satisfied divine law. Divyadi, the ceremonial tattoo, branding love in ink and iron. In the fringes of Norse and Saxon territories, couples sealed their devotion with ritual tattoos, etched by candle flame and sharpened bone. The patterns ranged from simple knots to elaborate runic inscriptions. Lu across the left shoulder, or truth, curved around an ankle. These tattoos marked you as claimed, an everlasting commitment that even death, or at least scurvy, couldn't wash away. The process was excruciating. Hot needles plunged into flesh, soot applied as pigment, and no anesthetic beyond a swig of mead and a steely prayer. Successful tattoos were celebrated with feasts. Botched ones were covered with medicinal poultices and whispered apologies. The church oscillated between outright bans, tattoos equated to pagan idols, and grudging acceptance in remote parishes. Either way, the spectacle of 2 lovebirds hobbling back from the ink parlor with arms ablaze was the talk of the Tanners' Guild for months. But Davde, Conclusion: the eternal masquerade continues. By now, you've witnessed the feverish tapestry of medieval courtship, masked intrigues, floral diplomacy, lethal libations, board game betrothals, and tattoos that tested both flesh and faith. If you survived this carnival of calamities, marriage beckoned. A contract more binding than any papal decree, and arguably just as perilous. In our next installment, Part 3, we'll storm the barricades of wedding festivities, the riotous bride's ale, the cackling dances around maypoles, and the curious tradition of groom's elderberry roast. We'll explore how a single misplaced chestnut in the wedding pudding could spark decades of family feuding, and why the best man sometimes ended up poached as a hostage until the dowry was delivered. So sharpen your wit, practice your bloom decoding, and stockpile antacids for another plunge into the splendid absurdity of medieval love. Until then, keep your quills handy and your cleanliness questionable, because in the Middle Ages nothing says I adore you like a shared case of trench foot. The sun climbed grudgingly above the thatched roofs as the bride's family poured jug after jug of spiced ale into the great wooden vat, declaring it good for digestion, righteousness, and utter inebriation. No less than 3 trembling maidens lifted enormous ladles to sample the frothy brew, each sip a sacrament in this carnival of matrimony. Villagers lined up with wooden cups, their breath visible in the chill air, faces flushed from the evening's dancing or anticipation of scandal. The bride's ale was more than a libation. It was a communal pact. Drink deeply, and you vowed not to remember how many times you stumbled over the bride's trailing skirts or nearly knocked over the pewter serving table. Fail to drink, and you risked being branded a prude, or worse, an ungrateful guest. Meanwhile, the groom stood atop an overturned barrel, clutching his flagon like a scepter, delivering a slurred speech that praised his new wife's virtues, her unmatched ability to churn butter without causing a dairy riot, her uncanny talent for silencing the family cat, and her enduring patience in the face of his chronic belching. He vowed to love her until the last rat scuttles from our larder, prompting a roar of approval from the assembled peasants. Few noticed that half his words were incoherent mashups of local proverbs and random insults, but in the glow of torchlight, every sentiment felt Shakespearean. The dancing commenced with the chariot reel, a circle dance wherein couples circled one another while dragging a crude wooden cart loaded with potatoes. Each successful revolution earned the couple a single spud. The lucky winner claimed the firstborn child's name would be etched into village lore. Those who tripped or dropped the cart were subjected to the wheel of shaming, a hastily constructed wooden wheel covered in quills dipped in soot, upon which the offender had to sit until the soot stained their linen garments irreparably. The wheel ensured that nobody forgot their clumsiness, nor dared attempt the chariot reel again without at least 2 jugs of ale to steady their gait. Between reels came the maypole jig, but with a twist. The pole was festooned not with ribbons, but with sausages. Impoverished villagers, yearning for protein, saw the dangling links as both temptation and insult. Suits of armor clanged as knights tried to bite off a link without dislodging the entire garland, a feat requiring both finesse and a draft exemption from their chainmail corset. Every sausage captured was ceremoniously presented to the bride as a token of tribute, though few dared approach the newlyweds before the morning's hangover had fully subsided. Once the dancing reached a crescendo of chaos and dislocated ankles, the feast commenced. The wedding pudding, a dense, boiled concoction of oats, suet, turnips, and questionable prunes, was unveiled with great ceremony. Superstitious cooks had tucked various charms into the mass. A silver coin for wealth, a broken thimble for a life of perpetual needle pricks, and a single conker for fertility. Guests plunged their forks with equal parts hope and dread, praying for the coin but bracing for the thimble. One unlucky spinster extracted the broken thimble and wailed her fate before promptly ducking under a bench to hide from pitying stares. Next came the conker, which lodged in old Mother Highcliffe's throat, requiring an emergency assist from the village butcher wielding a cleaver, fortunately used only to smash the nut free, not to carve her up. As night deepened into a starless velvet, a hush fell over the crowd. Time for the groom's elderberry roast, a moss-lined slab of charcoal topped with elderberry sauce, thought to bind souls in floral immortality. The groom was required to consume the entire roast while blindfolded, symbolizing trust in his bride's seasoning. Villagers placed bets on whether he'd choke on the bitter berries or demand a second helping. The groom's face contorted through 10 distinct expressions: gratitude, suspicion, floral-induced hallucinations, before he declared the sauce pleasantly murderous and wiped his visage on the sleeve of his tunic. The bride, seizing her moment, dipped a finger into the sauce and painted his cheek with a graceful stroke, sealing their union in both flavor and humiliation. No medieval wedding was complete without the custom of the leftover feast. On the third morning, surviving guests gathered at the bride's family barn, where platters of cold mutton, day-old cheese, and hardtack awaited them. But the pièce de résistance was the barmbrack, a loaf riddled with small wooden tokens representing future fortunes. A spike meant discord. A ring promised a spinster's next chance at marriage. A tiny wooden sword signaled bachelorhood of the highest order. Namely, the recipient would remain unwed, perhaps due to killing off too many prospective partners in drunken brawls. The farmer reading fortunes had a booming voice that could carry over the crows. A ring meant congratulations, while a spike meant mock condolences and a pint on the house. With the leftover feast concluded and the hangovers reluctantly forgiven, our bride and groom embarked on the traditional medieval honeymoon, a 6-week pilgrimage to the Abbey of St. Mungo in the next county. The journey involved sleeping in barns, sharing crusts of bread with strangers, and praying to saintly relics for mercy from fleas. At each stop, they had to perform a ritual kiss before the local relic, whether a saint's finger bone or a mummified hamster, proving their devotion both to each other and to the ecclesiastical bureaucracy. The couple returned not because their affection had deepened, but because the abbots refused to grant further indulgences once the bride developed a suspicious rash, and the groom lost his trousers during an exorcism of an allegedly possessed ox. Upon their return, the couple faced the post-nuptial audits, regular visits by tax collectors and former flame investigators. The auditors demanded proof that the bride's dowry had been properly integrated and that no secret lovers lurked in the woodpile. Neighbors might testify that they heard romantic moans emanating from the newlyweds' chamber on certain moonlit nights, interpreted as evidence of unsanctioned rendezvous. The couple therefore invested in heavy curtains and bribed the local priest to forget any overheard confessions. This phase, known as the marital verification, lasted a full season or until the harvest, whichever came first. Meanwhile, whispers circulated of the night of the cold shoulder, a weekly ceremony in which the groom had to eat supper alone outside the hearth as penance for any perceived slights, like forgetting to bless the evening meal or addressing his wife as "my lady wife" instead of her proper title. The bride, in turn, had to endure the night of the icy gaze, observing her husband snoring by the fire, while she folded his stockings into perfect pigeon-toed pairs. These mutual torments, they claimed, kept the flame alive. In reality, they merely ensured that neither partner got too comfortable in the warmth of the marital bed. Of course, not all trials were self-inflicted. At the first full moon after marriage, the couple had to face the ritual of the midnight fox. A fox, often a skittish weasel in borrowed fur, was released into their cottage. The bride and groom were tasked with capturing the creature by dawn, symbolizing their ability to snare misfortune before it devours domestic bliss. Failure invited a year of cold porridge and unsolicited advice from spinster aunts about respecting one's husband. Success meant bragging rights at the next village council meeting and a small parcel of communal land, which often ended up more trouble than it was worth, filled with brambles, field mice, and vengeful neighbors. As months turned to seasons, the couple encountered the dreaded trial of the firstborn. When the bride's belly swelled, neighboring mothers lined up to offer unsolicited childbirth stories, bloody, terrifying, and guaranteed to provoke hysterical tears. The groom stood by, helpless, offering cloves and ginger beer, which, due to fermentation mishaps, often caused more dramatic sound effects than relief. Should the child be born healthy, the couple received a ceremonial ribbon and the promise of peace to raise their family. If complications arose, the midwife absolved herself of responsibility by blaming planetary alignment, and the priest blessed them with spiritual offspring to comfort their earthly loss. Through it all, love survived, or at least something that passed for it. The couple learned to share sorrows and triumphs, repairing thatch roofs in the pouring rain, nursing livestock through the plague, and debating the merits of salted herring versus smoked eel for dinner. Their bond, forged in ale-stained chaos and tempered by relentless absurdity, proved resilient enough to outlast most medieval calamities. Sunstroke, dysentery, and the occasional baroness's decree that the couple must relocate to the farthest corner of the duchy. And so, as the third chapter of our journey draws to a close, consider the panorama of a medieval marriage, a tapestry woven from ale, affronts, rituals, and grudging affection. The bride's ale, the sausage-laden maypoles, the poisonous goblets, and the fox hunts all served to unite two souls against a world that was at best indifferent to their comfort, and at worst gleefully gleeful at their misfortune. In the next and final installment, we will venture into the twilight years of this tumultuous union, the creeping onset of arthritis, the politics of generational succession, and the last fraught dance at the couple's golden anniversary, complete with the infamous roast of the ancient cockerel. Prepare for an encore of absurdity, sorrow, and that uniquely medieval blend of love and ruin. The years slunk by like a bedraggled court jester, each more creaky than the last. It began with the subtle snapping of bones, a whispered ache in the joints, heralds of the dreaded crackling crusade that awaited every medieval spouse. Our once spry couple found themselves trading their dancing lances for wooden canes carved by the local cooper, each top hewn into the shape of a snarling boar, as if to mock their frailty. They shuffled through daily life as if navigating a minefield of loose cobblestones. One false step, and you face a tumble into the latrine, accompanied by the village storyteller's gleeful commentary. Breakfast became a ritual in patience. The bride, now more matriarch than maiden, insisted upon a porridge fortified with crushed nux vomica and yarrow, claiming it eased her morning naughtiness. The groom, whose back had long since taken on the curve of a recalcitrant scythe, countered with a mug of cold ale, claiming that only fermented barley could coax his spine into straightness. Thus they sat each dawn, their chairs suspiciously padded with straw and old cloaks, grumbling blessings over their bowls while the surviving villagers paused in passing to offer pithy condolences on their upcoming decline. Retirement was not an option in medieval life. Instead, they assumed the prestigious title of counselors of generational succession, presiding over the chaotic transfer of lands, livestock, and the ever-proliferating offspring who insisted they'd earn their keep by surviving infancy. The couple's barnyard bloomed into a miniature zoo, a trio of goats determined to kidnap sachets of the bride's linens, a pair of geese convinced the groom's legs were ornamental to their nesting cycle, and a temperamental ox named Bartholomew, whose horns grazed the rafters and whose temperament was rumored to be inherited from an exiled neighbor. When disputes arose, over grazing rights, chicken counting numbers, or who had the audacity to convert the guest chamber into a cheese-aging cellar, the couple convened the family council, a grand assembly held under the oak by the well, where grandchildren and errant nephews bickered until the sun dipped below the horizon. The bride, ever the diplomat, wielded her gavel, a pestle from the grain mill, like a scepter, dispensing judgments that sometimes involved community service, fetching water for the local priest, or public penance, wearing a mocking paper crown through the market square while reciting limericks about one's own foolishness. But no tradition stung more than the annual pilgrimage of painful reflection. On the anniversary of their wedding day, they retraced the old honeymoon route, but backward, because medieval logic dictated that returning the same way cancelled out both the blessings and the curses. Thus, they limped through barns, trekked across fields still haunted by plague pits, and knelt before every half-buried relic only to pray for mercy, not from God, but from the person who had insisted on this torturous reenactment. The final act involved scaling the abbey's mossy steps on hands and knees, reciting the same vows they'd mouthed flippantly decades before, to cleave as well in pestilence as in pot roast, an oath that now tasted of iron in their mouths. As age deepened its grip, the couple faced the weight of legacy. Their children, now lords and ladies in their own right, lodged in their modest manor, demanding tributes of wax candles and late-night lullabies. The bride's heart swelled as each grandchild arrived, a fresh testament to her enduring constitution. Yet each birth also heralded a fresh wave of unsolicited advice from the village midwife corps, who descended like vultures to demonstrate modern and affirm birthing techniques, which invariably involved more screaming than salvation. Then came the golden anniversary, the event that drew every surviving peasant, petty noble, and itinerant minstrel within a 50-mile radius. Invitations were sent via carrier pigeon, a novelty that cost more than a month's worth of barley, each stamped with the image of two clasped hands and the legend 50 years of wedded war. Preparation commenced with the construction of a dais beneath the oldest yew tree in the orchard, festooned with ribbons of beaten copper and tattered lace scavenged from abandoned convents. On the day itself, the bride donned her third best gown, a faded tapestry woven with scenes of their courtship, each panel illustrating a calamity: the sausage snares at the maypole, the near drowning of the groom's honor in the goblet game, the stolen goat that launched the Great Stallion Rebellion of 2022. The groom, polishing his jug tunic until it gleamed like a copper vat, greeted each guest with a slightly manic grin and the promise of a once-in-a-lifetime feast. Feast it was. In the center of the banquet table stood the roast of the ancient cockerel, a leviathan bird said to be older than the groom's first swear word. The cockerel's meat was as tough as boiled hide, yet its significance loomed larger than life. Consuming its sinewy breast was rumored to bestow another decade of joint pain-free bliss. The bride carved first, hacking through sinew and tendon with a cleaver that had once beheaded a particularly unruly goose. The groom followed, dispatching his portion with the zeal of a man determined to defy mortality, or at least to avoid having to eat the cockerel again anytime soon. Between bites, the assembled crowd erupted into toasts and tributes. Troubadours serenaded the couple with fresh ballads that praised their stamina in verse, structured like elaborate court documents. A poet laureate recited an epic encomium. 50 years you danced through plague and quagmire, your vows unbroken though often mired in mire, may your bones yet creak in harmony's sweet choir. A procession of grandchildren paraded around the dais, each brandishing a handcrafted gift, a pair of woolen socks with the groom's initials, just in case his old ones finally gave out, a jar of pickled turnips that the youngest insisted would cure any disease, and a leather-bound tome cataloging every argument the couple had ever had, complete with margin notes by nosy neighbors. Then came the moment of public confession. Each spouse had to recount the single most regrettable decision of their marriage. The bride admitted to investing her dowry in the ill-fated venture of pearlized turnip dye, which bankrupted half the artisan guild and stained the church curtains for decades. The groom owned up to kidnapping the neighbor's prize pig in a misguided attempt to win a rooster-feathered hat. He lost both pig and hat, but gained a lifelong dislike for porcine snout ringing. Laughter rippled through the crowd, blending with tears of empathy, as the couple forgave each other with a short embrace that creaked like the hinges of their old bedroom door. As twilight descended, the golden anniversary concluded with the Dance of Decay, an elaborate waltz performed by the bride and groom as they were led through a ring of torches. Their steps were tentative, measured by the bride's cane tap and the groom's half-hiccuped rhythm. At its climax, they collapsed onto a velvet chaise, to be crowned by the village matron with a wreath of elderflowers and sprigs of wolfsbane, a bittersweet symbol of affection and adversity entwined. In the final act of this medieval saga, the couple retired to their dimly lit chamber, where they pondered the journey, a tapestry of blunders, bodice tears, pox outbreaks, and unctuous declarations of undying devotion. The bride traced the scars on her arms, the faint lines where tattoos had faded, where needle and soot had once mingled to commemorate mortal vows. The groom ran a gnarled finger along the grooves of his cane, each notch marking a child's birth, a barn's construction, a rebellion quelled by his steady hand. They spoke little, for words had long since proved inadequate. Instead, they shared a flask of mead brewed from the very elderberries that had sealed their union, toasting silently to the absurdity of love in an era where every heartbeat risked scurvy, every kiss risked plague, and every promise was forged in the crucible of survival. Their laughter, muted by dentures and exhaustion, echoed off the stone walls, an echo that carried the resonance of two souls bound beyond the whims of fate or fortune. And so ends our journey through medieval courtship, from lice-ridden serenades to elderberry-inspired hallucinations, from chariot reels to golden jubilees, from love's first blush to love's final rattling breath. It was a world where romance stood shoulder to shoulder with ruination, where devotion demanded as much grit as guile, and where the sweetest moments arose from the ashes of calamity. If you find modern dating daunting, remember the medieval way. Trade hygiene for hope, don your finest armor of sarcasm, and pledge yourself to another, come hellfire, hailstorms, or the inevitable cracking of your own bones. In the end, love in the Middle Ages was the ultimate absurdity, and yet, paradoxically, also the most profound testament to the resilience of the human heart. Hey guys, imagine you, dripping wet, shoulder to shoulder with your crush in a steamy wooden tub, surrounded by strangers, rats, and the faint odor of cured herring. Welcome to medieval romance, minus the scented candles and plus a healthy dose of plague spores. Once upon a damp Middle Ages, communal bathing was less about zen relaxation and more about testing your courage, intolerance for body fluids you'd rather not name. Dating in medieval Europe came down to forging alliances, negotiating dowries, and occasionally sharing a lukewarm soak in a public bathhouse, where intimate conversation meant avoiding accidental splashes in someone else's eye socket. Bathhouses, known as stews or stew sheds, were everywhere. From grand monastic complexes with heated hippocausts to ramshackle wooden tubs perched over dung pits. Despite the risk of disease, clergy and laity alike flocked to these steamy dens. Why? Because climbing into a communal tub offered the ultimate medieval flirtation. Physical proximity without the scandal of private chambers, at least until the local bishop caught wind. Imagine the scene. You pay a penny at the entrance, hand over your coarse tunic to the bath attendant, who may or may not be your neighbor's mother in a burlap dress, and step into a vessel big enough for 20 souls. The water, warmed by a fire stoked with oak logs and horse manure, was cloudy with soapwort extract and more microbes than a cesspit. Your date, likely sporting lice and a garlic hangover, gives you a sheepish grin as you both settle against the slippery plank benches. Small talk under these conditions was an art form. You couldn't wax poetic about the roses in her garden. Poisonous nightshade grew unchecked nearby. Instead, you complimented her resilience. "You have excellent back stamina," you'd say, trying to keep your voice steady above the hiss of steam. She'd reply, "Your willingness to share bubonic droplets is profoundly gallant." Flirting rituals in the stews included the towel tango, a coy game where each person in turn dipped a rag into the water and flicked it at someone else's feet. A direct hit signified interest. A miss demanded a sheepish apology or the purchase of an extra sprig of rosemary for scent camouflage. More daring souls enacted the elbow boil, leaning in close under the guise of inspecting a blister on one's arm, hoping to brush forearms and gauge each other's pulse, or at least hope someone didn't slip and dunk your entire head. Priests denounced the practice as sinful. Bathhouses acquired reputations as dens of iniquity where drunk flagellants and renegade monks engaged in fleshly congress amidst the steam. Sermons warned of temptations lurking in every steaming vessel, yet parishioners queued eagerly, convinced that a skimpy wall of steam could absolve minor indiscretions. Bishops threatened excommunication. Bathhouse keepers simply changed the bath's name and painted new lewd frescoes to draw curious adventurers. Politics played out in the suds. Nobles hosted private court baths in palace courtyards, ornate marble tubs fed by aqueducts and heated by knights condemned to shovel charcoal. Here, the aristocracy indulged in lavish cleansing rituals, perfumed oils from the Levant, rosewater infused with gold dust, and an entire cadre of eunuch attendants. These exclusive soaks became networking events. Lords whispered of alliances between soapy latherings, arranged marriages were brokered over shared basins, and espionage flourished amid the foam. Yet the working-class version was chaos incarnate. Peasants dunked one after another, unwashed dogs darted beneath the boards, and the fat matron of the bath scooped scum from the water with a sieve, often dropping half the loot back in when distracted by a passing pickpocket. Despite this filth, the chance to gossip, flirt, and even flirt with danger held massive appeal. After all, where else could you steal a kiss under the pretext of rinsing out your hair? But communal bathing posed grave hazards. Open wounds could slip bacteria into your bloodstream. Waterborne illnesses, dysentery, typhoid, even leech infestations were common. The only reliable protection, vinegar-soaked cloths wrapped around your head. Unfortunately, vinegar's pungency often overpowered pleasant conversation, So many love-struck bathers skipped the precaution, betting that romance was worth a little extra intestinal distress. Then there was hygiene by proxy. When you scrubbed someone else's back, you risked transferring their lice, scabies, or worse. Couples developed clever workarounds, the double dipper approach. Each person had 2 wash basins, one for hair, one for body, and you pretended to admire your partner's reflection in the small copper mirror, all while secretly inspecting for flea bites. Romantic escapades in baths sometimes escalated into theatrical stunts. Consider the infamous naked masquerade hosted by a Bavarian count in 1323. Guests unmasked their faces, danced in the warm water to lyre and tambourine, and whispered coded messages through submerged pigeonholes carved into the tub's side. The masquerade ended spectacularly when the count's rival flung open the hatch, releasing a pack of feral pigs into the water, turning the soiree into a squealing free-for-all that ended only when the mayor arrived, torches ablaze to restore order. Folklore added spice. Tales circulated of lovers bound by bathhouse oaths, promises exchanged under vows that the steam would witness true affection. Breaking such an oath was said to curse you with unshakable body odor or worse, a specter that followed you until you returned to that precise tub and repented. Most scoffed at ghost stories, but the risk of public humiliation and a rat bite was incentive enough to stay faithful. Bathing together also played into medieval medicine. Physicians argued that soaking in hot water purged bad humors. Bloodletting and cupping followed hot baths, recommended before any romantic tryst. A suitor might insist his beloved join him for a bath to balance her temperament, hoping feverish cheeks would kindle passion. Some bathhouses installed cold plunge pools. Enter at your own peril. A sudden chill after the heat was believed to shock the system, strengthening virtue or, in unlucky cases, detonating a ruptured appendix. Courtly literature captured the allure. Troubadour penned poems praising the steam-kissed maiden, whose damp locks glistened like dew on a rose, and lamented the shy gallant, whose trembling knees betrayed his desire as he attempted to knead her shoulders. Storybooks depicted daring escapades, a knight disguised as a bathhouse attendant, saving his lady from drowning in a tub rigged to collapse by jealous rivals. These stories were performed in tiny theaters, complete with water troughs and live fish, enthralling audiences with tales of love and near drowning. Yet for all the romance, baths were temporary. After a soak, patrons peddled toweled mantles or raw wool cloaks, emerging from the steamy cocoon into cold, muddy streets. The post-bath chill could induce hypothermia, so couples raced for the nearest tavern, sipping hot spiced mead and recounting how their hearts had raced faster than their toes. In our next segment, we'll plunge deeper into the scandalous politics of bathhouse ownership, the rise of steam injunctions by rigid Puritans, and the legendary love potion reputed to be distilled from bathwater of unsuspecting couples. We'll also explore how Renaissance humanists revived private bathing, transforming the medieval nightmare into the birthplace of modern spa culture. As rigid Puritans raised their voices against the steam sodomy lurking in every bathhouse corner, proprietors fought back with steam-powered defenses, literally. Ingenious inventors installed levers that released scalding steam onto any persistent eavesdropper, ensuring that prying eyes and noses withdrew swiftly. Lovers learned to time their rendezvous for the scalding hour, when the attendant stoked the furnaces to blistering temperatures, forcing everyone to clamber out or be roasted alive. This violent purge left only the most desperate couples luxuriating in their shared agony, swaying like wilted lettuce in a sauna of impending doom. In regions where bishops wielded more influence than barons, steam injunctions outlawed communal bathing entirely. Bathhouse owners responded by masquerading as charitable, pestilence purification centers, complete with forged ecclesiastical seals and the stench of sanctity. Patrons queued for penance and bathing in equal measure, confessing petty sins. I once gave stale bread to a beggar, before dunking themselves in wooden troughs of lukewarm water. The line between church and bathhouse blurred until every dip felt like both spiritual washing and potential heresy, heightening the thrill for risk-loving romantics. Meanwhile, a clandestine network of bathwater brokers emerged, harvesting the residual moisture from high-born lovers' private tubs. These entrepreneurs claimed that the distilled essence of noble passion could be sold as an elixir, guaranteed to inspire unbreakable devotion in the purchaser's chosen paramour. A single vial of Duchess Eleanor's bathwater fetched a year's worth of farm wages, though buyers often discovered the scent to be suspiciously similar to swamp gas and fermented onion skins. Nonetheless, desperate suitors sniffed, smeared, and whispered sweet nothings, convinced that romantic victory lay in that humid, slightly rancid perfume. Secret societies formed around these potions. The Order of the Soapy Snare convened at midnight in abandoned tannery pits, where members dipped their hands into vats of preserved bathwater, reciting oaths to bind the heart of she who bathes next. Breaking this oath was said to incur the curse of eternal dandruff, or worse, perpetual flatulence. Notoriously, Sir Rupert Malbog of Warwickshire tried to circumvent the order by applying horse sweat instead, an act that resulted in his immediate banishment from polite society and a lifelong stench no perfume could mask. Beyond the smuggled potions, a more theatrical form of attraction developed, the bathhouse betrothal. In this spectacle, a noble suitor arranged a staged rescue of his intended from a deliberately collapsing private tub. With henchmen lurking beneath the floorboards, the tub gave way mid-soak, plunging the unsuspecting lady into freezing, mud-laden water. As she flailed, the suitor burst forth, brandishing a towel and a forged decree of marriage, before hoisting her to safety and declaring love as deep as this pit. Critics called it reckless. Historians call it a remarkably early form of performance art. The lady in question never spoke of her experience, but reportedly refused to bathe again for the remainder of her widowhood. The noblest of private baths found in royal palaces became the backdrop for political intrigue. Kings held diplomatic soaks, inviting foreign envoys to scrub each other's backs while discussing treaties. Sequestered behind a velvet screen, torn more often than honorable alliances, these sessions doubled as lie detector tests. Any man whose chatter faltered under the scalding water was suspected of duplicity. Ambassadors emerged either cleansed of suspicion or drenched in diplomatic outrage, clutching towels as if they were peace treaties themselves. For the lower classes, makeshift bathing traditions offered opportunities for private moments. Farmers' wives installed tub traps, hidden compartments beneath the basin containing notes of affection or small coins. During the bustle of communal baths, a quick dip into the trap allowed lovers to exchange messages, sometimes verses of bawdy limericks, sometimes stolen promises of elopement. Discovery of these traps led to blackmail. An enraged spouse could spill the clandestine notes at a village meeting, sentencing the lovers to public flogging, and the trap master to drown in his own bathwater. Despite the risk of disease and scandal, some couples turned bathing into a survival ritual. Frontier settlers on the edges of Christendom built mobile bath carts, barrels on wheels heated by portable hearths. These contraptions rolled into encampments, offering fleeting warmth and intimacy amid snowdrifts. Lovers braved frostbite and enemy raids to undress together, believing that shared suffering cemented bonds more potently than any rose or ring. Historians credit these mobile baths with inspiring later military field hospitals, though few records mention the quantity of smooches exchanged in between care for frozen limbs. In urban centers, guilds formed around bathhouse trades. The Lavender's Guild, named ominously for its favored scent, trained apprentices in the arts of water heating, buttock scraping, and scandal containment. Guild masters carried weighted ladles to enforce silence. A single misplaced whisper could alert guards or disapproving clergy. Apprentices aspiring to master status had to endure the trial by tap, spending a fortnight in a near-empty bathhouse, fending off pigeons, pickpockets, and the despair that comes from endless echoing lather. Only those who emerged without succumbing to madness or going blind from soapwort fumes earned their lavender pin and permission to officiate midnight matings. As hygiene practices slowly improved, a cultural shift began. By the dawn of the Renaissance, private bathing chambers reappeared, decorated with stucco and tapestries instead of dung pits. These new baths borrowed lessons from medieval communal tubs, hidden peepholes for spying, subterranean pipes rigged to produce surprise splashes, and specially trained bath hospitalers skilled in discreet concierging of noble indiscretions. The medieval nightmare had evolved into the Baroque spa, a controlled environment where lovers still risked scandal, but at least avoided typhus. Back in medieval times, folklore insisted that steam itself possessed romantic properties. Stories of the steam maiden, a spectral figure rising from the bathhouse vapors, warned couples that succumbing to lust in the heat could summon her. She was said to entwine her translucent arms around those two eager in their embraces, binding them in an ethereal hug until dawn, when they awoke soaked in cold dew and shame. Though most regarded the tale as a cautionary bedtime story, several aristocrats claimed to have seen her silhouette writhe between plumes of steam, evidence, they said, of divine disapproval or perhaps just poor ventilation. Scientific minds of the era tried to explain the allure of the hot soak. Early physicians hypothesized that steam opened the pores of the skin to metaphysical influences, love's humors, celestial alignments, and the vibrations of angels. They prescribed precise rituals, 3 clockwise laps per bath, a whispered recitation of the Canticle of Cleanliness, and the application of rose petals at sunset. Failure to adhere to the protocol could result in soul scald, a condition marked by sudden fits of melancholy and a gnawing sense of regret whenever one passed a bathhouse thereafter. Despite every obstacle, clerical condemnations, lethal pathogens, and itinerant pig invasions, the communal bath remained a fixture of medieval social life. Lovers risked reputation and health for a sliver of closeness, forging memories in the haze of steam that memory alone could never wash away. Their whispered promises, scribbled on wet parchment, might have dissolved with the next rinse, but the very act of vulnerability became a testament to the lengths one would go for a moment of intimacy. As public bathhouses faded into history's cesspits, replaced by porcelain tubs and modern plumbing, their legacy endured in the lore of love and folly. Today's spa retreats and hot tubs owe their seductive power to those medieval stews, where romance bubbled up alongside bacteria, and where every stolen caress came with the thrill of potential doom. So when you next sink into a warm bath, remember the century-old gamble, that perfect mix of thrill, discomfort, and absurdity that turned hygiene into a perilous romance. The steam still clung to your hair as you hurried from the bathhouse vestibule, but for part 3 our tale dives into the darker, wetter depths of medieval intimacy, where flirtation turned into farce, ailments lurked beneath every splash, and the very act of drying off could become a trial by fire. By the mid-14th century, rumors spread that shared baths could transmit not only fleas and lice, but also the dreaded wet pox, a mysterious affliction said to cause spontaneous weeping and an inexplicable obsession with beginners' lacework. Physicians, armed with distaste and little else, prescribed elaborate drying ceremonies. Each bather was to be wrapped in layers of linen, patted vigorously by attendants armed with clubs, and exposed to open hearths until their skin crackled like roasting chestnuts. Lovers who insisted on mutual toweling risked singeing one another, or, worse, being accused of immodest combustion by the local bishop. Scalding steam, originally a symbol of purification, became a tool for clandestine warfare. Feuding families, keen to sabotage courtship, employed steam saboteurs, masked agents who crept into bathhouses at night to dump buckets of ice-cold water onto unsuspecting couples. The sudden chill provoked shrieks that echoed through the tiled grotto, often triggering stampedes of naked peasants in search of exits. Flash floods of icy water led to broken ribs, bruised egos, and occasionally impromptu wrestling matches where the losing suitor was forced to bail water with a ladle for a fortnight as penance. Yet, in the flickering torchlight of these steamy arenas, romance retained its twisted allure. Couples developed inventive rituals to signal genuine affection amid the chaos. The earthenware embrace involved sharing a clay mug of bathwater, drunk slowly, lest the gritty sediment scratch one's throat. If both parties managed a polite sip without retching, it signified mutual devotion. Retch too soon, and you earned a mocking serenade from the water carrier, complete with a lute and a chorus of soggy songs. Some pairings endured this ordeal, nightly, convinced that their love would bloom with each cup, though historians note many ended up with chronic gastritis and a lingering distrust of pottery. In more refined circles, nobles refined their bathing customs into art forms. Royal couples commissioned perfumed fountains, marble tubs with hidden nozzles that sprayed scented mists of lavender, orange blossom, or in one disastrous experiment, petrified walrus musk. The musk turned rancid within hours, enveloping the bath chamber in a stench so foul that envoys passing through the palace declared it a chemical weapon, and demanded reparations. Nevertheless, the fountain concept inspired courtly poets to compose odes to the fragrant soak, praising love's power to transform even the most odious odors into sweet memories. But communal umbrellas of fragrance couldn't mask the very real risks of drowning by distraction. Bathhouses featured tiered levels, shallow pools for foot soaks, deeper basins for thigh immersion, and the dreaded bottomless bog rumored to be enchanted by spirits. No official measurements existed. A single misstep could plunge a suitor into sudden abyss, where he flailed until an overzealous matron yanked him out by the ear. The spectacle was often the highlight of the evening, with onlookers placing bets on how many bubbles would surface before rescue. Champions of the bog earned the title, Sir Bobbles-a-Lot, a dubious honor that prevented them from ever removing their armor again without flashbacks. Healing waters held their own mythology. Pilgrims traveled great distances to bathe in sulfur springs said to cure lovesickness, a medieval diagnosis for pining, swooning, or any excessive sighing in public. These springs bubbled with rotten egg fumes strong enough to peel paint from church doors. Couples who ventured into the sludge-swollen pools emerged either cured of ardor or afflicted with permanent flatulence, depending on the spring's activity that day. Local legend claimed that if you sneezed thrice underwater, you'd marry your bath companion, though baptism by brine sometimes led to weddings between humans and errant sheep. To dodge the stench and scandal, some entrepreneurs pioneered moonlight baths, outdoor pools illuminated by phosphorescent mushrooms. Patrons soaked beneath the ghostly glow, convinced the lunar ambiance heightened sensuality. The mushrooms, however, were mildly hallucinogenic, and bathers reported visions of dancing skeletons and impromptu recitals of Malthusian sonnets. Court poets, ever eager for inspiration, frequented these baths despite the risk of turning their brains into porridge. A few even composed entire epics mid-dip, though scribes later admitted those verses made more sense when read upside down by candlelight. Meanwhile, peasant lovers found hidden niches to avoid prying eyes. Abandoned washhouses at the edge of town, overgrown with nettles, became secret rendezvous points. Courting couples carved crude benches into sandstone walls, scrawling initials alongside warnings. Here lies Jeffrey, claims he saw me naked, and lived to regret it. Their privacy came at a cost. Fungal infections, snake bites from the surrounding foliage, and occasional raids by local drunks seeking a moonlit swim. Yet the thrill of risk lent their embraces an electric charge, as if each stolen kiss were plotted against fate itself. In some regions, bathing customs merged with festive pageantry. The Carnival of the Cleansed occurred annually on the eve of Lent. Bathhouses transformed into gaudy pleasure palaces with colorful lanterns, masked performers, and vats of sweet mead served in ladles. Couples participated in the Symphony of Splash, a choreographed dance where each dip and spin sent waves across the pool, orchestrated to live pipers and drummers perched on makeshift rafts. Legend holds that a particularly enthusiastic performance in 1387 sank half the platform, prompting the Duke to ban synchronized swimming forever, though secret societies still practiced the routine under candlelit vows. In the intellectual enclaves of Bologna and Paris, scholars debated the ethics of communal bathing at length. University professors formed bathing academies, where debates on love's nature unfolded over steamy benches. One treatise argued that bathing together mirrored divine unity, while another countered that without partitions it violated celestial order. Members occasionally challenged each other to duels with soap ladles, settling disputes with sudsy skirmishes that left their robes useless for further lectures. These learned contests inspired later academic traditions, most notably fraternity hazing rituals involving punch bowls and questionable punch recipes. But perhaps the most famous medieval date involving baths was the tragic romance of Lady Isabel and Sir Reynard. Their love blossomed in the grand stews of Rouen, where midnight soaks kindled their passion. Sir Reynard, dashing but distracted by a rival's poison-laced towel, accidentally dunked Lady Isabel's cherished prayer book into the water. Isabel seized his helm, hurling him head first into the fountain of rosewater meant for the bishop's retinue. Mortified, Reynard fled into the night and joined a hermitage, leaving Isabel to wander the bathhouse corridors, murmuring broken haikus about lost towels and shattered vows. Their tale became a cautionary ballad sung by minstrels. Beware the bath, lest you drown a heart with a careless splash. As the 15th century dawned, innovations attempted to reclaim communal baths from scandal. Metal baths replaced wooden vats, gleaming copper tubs that resisted rot but amplified every whisper. Ingenious attendants installed privacy curtaining systems, lengths of tapestry hung from ceiling hooks, though these often caught fire from nearby braziers, resulting in smoky evacuations and scorched attire. Bathhouse engineers experimented with dry steam chambers, saunas avant la lettre, but patrons complained of dehydration and spontaneous eyebrow loss, so the idea died in a cloud of disappointment. Cultures beyond Europe adopted and adapted the medieval bath concept. Crusaders returning from the Levant spoke of Turkish hammams and Japanese onsen. Some bathhouse proprietors in Venice installed Moorish-style domes and marble basins, marketing them as exotic soaks, though locals quibbled that bathing practices from distant lands belonged under different roofs entirely. The resulting mashup of customs created eclectic scenes, Italian merchants sipping mulled wine as they soaked, Arabs performing call to prayer while wrapped in steam, and uninvited rodents exploring corners as anthropological specimens. Amid all this, the peasant bride and groom marked their wedding night with a special nuptial plunge. A half-flooded trough carved into their bridal chamber served as the ceremonial first bath of their union. Neighbors gathered to witness whether the couple emerged smiling or shrieking. Smiles foretold prosperity. Shrieks meant at least 3 children would be born with odd quirks, crossed eyes, lisping vowels, or an obsession with bucket weaving. The most superstitious claimed that if the bride fainted mid-soak, the marriage would end in calamity, an omen that led some grooms to slip sleeping potions into their bride's rosewater cup, a ploy that rarely ended happily or legally. Throughout Part 3, we've surfed the frothy waves of medieval bathing rituals, from poisonous towels to performance art, from sacred springs to scandalous secrets. The act of bathing together became a crucible where love, disease, politics, and ovine interference collided. Next, in our final segment, we'll emerge from these waters, examining how bathing customs influenced courtship, marriage alliances, and the very architecture of romance. We'll trace the path from dung-heated tubs to ornate Renaissance baths and see how these traditions ebbed into modern spa culture, leaving behind echoes of that first perilous, intimate soak. As dawn's chill gave way to the promise of sunlight, our medieval lovers emerged from the steamy crucible of courtship forever changed. Part 4 begins with the aftermath of their final intimate plunge, skin pruny, hearts pounding, and reputations teetering on the brink of scandal. From these soggy origins would spring innovations that transformed bathing from communal peril into private sanctuary and reshaped the very architecture of romance. Courts across Europe, inspired by whispered tales of lovers stalked by scandal in public stews, began to commission private bathhouses attached to royal chambers. Kings and queens ordered chambers vaulted in stone, lined with marble basins fed by lead pipes imported from Rome. These semi-secret suites featured curtained niches where only the most trusted attendants might enter, and balconies overlooking perfumed gardens, a deliberate invitation to whispers carried on the breeze. Courtiers vied for invitations, for a shared soak with the sovereign was tantamount to royal favor, and a misstep in manners could leave one banished from both tub and throne. The architecture of these private baths echoed the rituals of intimacy. Hypocaust heating systems, borrowed from ancient villas, sent warm air beneath mosaic floors. Niches held bronze cauldrons of rosewater infused with spices, and alabaster fountains dripped water scented with orange blossom. Mirrors of polished bronze reflected candlelight, flickering on arched ceilings, creating the illusion of endless space. Couples reclined on stone ledges, their conversations hushed, their limbs entwined like the carved vines climbing the walls. Architects whispered that no prism could refract light so seductively as a lover's gaze reflected in lamplit steam. Beyond palaces, wealthy merchant families built urban bathhouses for private use. These domestic stews featured separate wings for men and women, each with luxuriant tubs carved from single blocks of marble. Phoenician traders, having sampled Ottoman hammams during their voyages, installed domed roofs pierced by star-shaped oculi, letting moonlight spill ghostly patterns onto the water. Silk draperies absorbed excess steam and muffled sound, ensuring that every sigh, every hushed confession remained behind velvet barriers. In these enclaves, courtship unfolded like a ritual dance, an exchange of scented oils, the careful tracing of contours with perfumed sponges, and the silent flutter of eyelids under the hush of steam. As bathing gained prestige, treatises on the art of courtly soak appeared. Scholars penned De Balneis Amoris, manuals prescribing the ideal water temperature for eliciting blushes, the correct ratio of bath herbs to stir pulses, and the precise sequence of ablutions to heighten anticipation. One section instructed suitors to recite sonnets while kneading their beloved's shoulders, for the resonance of poetic meter in water was believed to quicken the heartbeat more than any kiss. Another advised brides-to-be to bind a ribbon of lavender around their ankles, a subtle signal that any hands braiding the lavender into her towels would be greeted with smiles rather than scowls. The reverberations of medieval bathing rituals extended into the sacred sphere. Pilgrimage routes once trodden for relics saw the addition of bathing chapels, cryptic sanctuaries where pilgrims washed away more than physical grime. Holy baths were fed by natural springs believed to have been sanctified by saints or martyrs. Lovers visited these sites to combine devotion with desire. A ritual dip symbolized the baptism of their bond, and prayers whispered over the water-sealed vows before heaven itself. Manuscript illuminations depict couples kneeling at chapel fonts, water dripping from their brows like celestial tears, and angels hovering overhead as silent witnesses. Yet, for all the elegance of private and sacred baths, the medieval ethos of communal bathing never wholly vanished. Inns along major routes retained small bathhouses, offering weary travelers a chance to scrub away dust and loneliness alike. Here, nobility and peasantry might share a tank, clothed in loose shifts, trading travel tales over splashing water. For wandering minstrels, these inns became stages for impromptu performances, reciting ballads while scrubbing the backs of patrons, then accepting coins dropped into buckets of soapy water. Such exchanges fostered a fleeting intimacy, a spark of warmth amid cold stone walls. Meanwhile, the legacy of medieval bathing rituals ventured overseas. Crusaders returning with tales of Turkish hammams inspired Venetian nobles to retrofit their bath chambers with similar features. Reclining benches of marble, overhead nozzles dispensing warm aromatic mists, and attendants skilled in foam massage. These spas blended Eastern opulence with Western courtliness, birthing a hybrid culture of bathing that would later flourish in Renaissance Italy. Grand Duke palaces in Florence boasted Hall of the 100 Basins, each basin a miniature ritual site where lovers could carve initials into copper trays or exchange verses on water-stained parchment. By the 16th century, public health concerns began to temper the romance of baths. Physicians urged caution, and outbreaks of dysentery led some city councils to restrict communal bathing to specialized apothecary baths, where water was treated with sulfur or herbs deemed antiseptic. These medicinal baths, precursors to modern spa resorts, promised cures for lovesickness as much as for gout or scurvy. Elites flocked to these establishments, donning linen bathing shifts, enjoying restorative dips, and indulging in side conversations in secluded arbors. The spa towns of Bohemia and the German Reich blossomed. Their curative waters earned renown across Europe, and courting couples traveled there, hoping to heal both heartache and rheumatism. Industrial innovations in plumbing and heating further transformed the dating landscape. Cast-iron bathtubs became symbols of bourgeois comfort, installed in private homes where couples could at last bathe without fear of spectators. Unless, of course, servants slipped in to draw bathwater at dawn and caught lovers still entangled in nœuds. Sheets, privacy, once a priceless luxury, became taken for granted, and yet the medieval thrill of risking discovery lingered in the imagination. Cartoons and plays of the era lampooned newlywed husbands bursting into tiled bathrooms, towels in hand, only to find their brides mid-soak, scolding them for lacking chivalry or patience. Romantic literature embraced these themes. Novels and poems celebrated the erotic potential of water, clandestine meetings beside country springs, moonlit swims in manor ponds, and love letters sealed with drops of bathwater. Paintings captured glistening skin and billowing steam, each brush stroke a nod to the medieval mastery of intimacy through immersion. Theater production staged bath scenes on stage, complete with water troughs and concealed pumps, thrilling audiences with choreographed splashes and stolen caresses glimpsed through the haze. By the Enlightenment, bathing had shed much of its medieval baggage. Indoor plumbing, heated with coal-fired boilers, appeared in urban residences, and the notion of a shared tub dwindled to the realm of folklore. Yet the medieval principle endured, that water, heat, and vulnerability could forge bonds stronger than steel. Victorian lovers wrote in diaries of their first damp embrace in a marble tub. Edwardian spa retreats boasted private plunge pools for honeymooners, and the modern hot tub remained a site of whispered confidences and laughter echoing over jets of bubbling water. Today's spas, luxurious, sanitized, and discreet, trace a direct lineage to those medieval stews and royal baths. The communal sauna evokes the crowded wooden tubs of yore. Mineral springs carry forward the healing quest of pilgrims, and date-night discounts on couples' massages echo the medieval penchant for shared bathing rituals. Yet the thrill of potential mischief has softened. No longer do we risk excommunication or the mire of public scandal, but the echoes of absurdity persist. When you slip into a steaming tub beside someone you cherish, remember that you partake in an age-old rite, a dance through water and heat that once teetered on the brink of calamity. And so ends our 4-part saga of medieval bathing as the ultimate date idea. From lice-ridden public stews to vaulted private baths, from poisoned towels to perfumed fountains, from communal trials to intimate sanctuaries. The Middle Ages taught us that love often demands vulnerability, that proximity amplifies passion, and that the simplest pleasure, a shared bath, can be both an absurd hazard and a profound declaration of trust. May your own soaks be safer, sweeter, and far less likely to summon the steam maiden's curse, but perhaps just as memorable. Hey guys, have you ever wondered why a simple piece of parchment could spark secret rendezvous, family feuds, and, on one notorious occasion, a full-blown castle siege? Today, we're unearthing the arcane art of medieval love letters, the hidden codes, poisoned inks, and knock-knock messages that turned courtship into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. Stick around for tales of smuggled sonnets, betrayal by broken seals, and the one scandal that involved a naked duke, a stolen quill, and a very indignant goat. Let's plunge headfirst into the ink-stained chaos of Part 1. Picture a world without email drafts, where every word committed to vellum could land you in stocks, or worse, earn you a one-way trip to a convent. In medieval Europe, love letters were political weapons, family heirlooms, and occasionally the only thing keeping a forlorn suitor from wandering off to join the nearest monastery. Welcome to the era when romance required ciphers, clandestine couriers, and a healthy disregard for papal decrees. Before a word was written, you had to procure your materials. Parchment, made from soaked and stretched animal skins, cost roughly as much as a soldier's monthly wages, and smelled faintly of stale barn. Quills came from goose feathers, but a prized swan quill fetched a small fortune among nobles. Once dipped in ink concocted from oak galls and iron salts, your quill transformed into an instrument of devotion, or doom, depending on whose hands it fell into. Ink itself was a secret science. Amateur scribes risked dysentery by mixing unwashed galls, while experts traded recipes in hushed dead-of-night meetings. A drop of vinegar prevented mold, but too much turned your prose to brown sludge. Some daring romantics spiked their ink with narcotics, belladonna for bravado, mandrake to deepen the blush in their beloved's cheeks. One infamous baroness wrote a passionate letter so heavily laced with opiates that her intended purportedly spent a week chasing ghosts of purple lilies and singing madrigals to his boots. Let's talk seals. Wax seals proved authenticity, but also carried messages of their own. Different colors signified rank and mood. Red for burning passion, black for secret sorrow, and even green for flirtatious teasing. Some lovers commissioned custom signets carved with entwined initials or symbols, rose entwined with dagger, hand pressed over heart, or the dreaded raven's claw. Breaking a seal was akin to tearing open a bomb. Do it in public, and you risked shaming yourself, your family, and the scribe who dared to transcribe your loopy cursive. Courier services were equally fraught. In bustling towns, messengers pedaled through narrow alleys on foot or muleback, vying with market carts and stray dogs. But nobility preferred winged couriers, trained falcons who carried tiny tubes of reinforced vellum strapped to their legs. Legend claims one pigeon faded into starlight, heading from London to Paris, only to reappear months later at court in Toulouse, bearing love verses riddled with beetle larvae. The poet who penned them accused his rival of sabotaging his romance by unleashing the inky plague upon his quills. Then there was the art of concealment. If papal edicts forbade correspondence with certain ladies, widows under guardianship, nuns on vow, letters had to hide in plain sight. Courtiers hollowed out comb handles, secreted notes inside candle cores, or stitched missives into the hems of doublets. Noble women, in particular, became masters of scholastic sewing, weaving messages of longing into embroidery patterns. A simple stylized lily might mean, "I miss your touch," whereas a plucked petal hinted, "Meet me tonight by the moonlit turrets." Decode incorrectly, and you face the shame of revealing your intentions, or, worse, public flogging for sorcery. Of course, the language itself was a minefield. Latin was the mark of the educated, but using it in love letters invited mockery from scholar poets. Vernacular tongues offered intimacy, but risked misinterpretation. The word for darling in Old French could also mean dirge, leading to a dozen awkward funerals when suitors misread their sweetheart's intent. To avoid linguistic landmines, many penned in hybrid dialects, Franco-Latin mashups that only insiders could understand. Proofreading required a trusted friend, or blind faith that your heartfelt profession of eternal devotion didn't accidentally declare eternal servitude. But if writing was perilous, reading was riskier. Unsealed letters lay in public spaces, taverns, market stalls, or the ladies' privy, where curious bystanders might intercept them. To combat this, lovers devised invisible ink techniques, lemon juice, milk, or even cat's milk, hidden under a layer of overtly banal grocery lists. After the addressee read the surface text, they carefully heated the parchment over a candle to reveal the hidden verse. A misstep could singe away half the confession, or set the whole village ablaze if the scribe nodded off mid-decoding. Then came the legendary mirror script of Lady Sabine of Aquitaine. She penned her entire love poem in reverse letters, so that the recipient needed a polished bronze mirror and a steady hand to decipher each line. Worse, her rival swapped her mirror for a fragment of broken lens, leaving Sabine's suitor twisting the glass in vain until dawn. The heartbreak supposedly inspired him to compose the epic Ode to Shattered Optics, which remains a staple of tragicomic court readings to this day. By mid-medieval times, the stakes escalated. Rival families hired spies to intercept or forge letters. Countless duels erupted over suspicious paragraphs. In one feud, the Rivers brothers quarreled over a single misaligned comma that they believed altered "I worship you" to "I despise you." The dispute ended when both dueling parties were cast into Guwa, the moat by outraged townsfolk, tired of cleaning up their weekly brawls. And then there was the lawsuit of 1372. Lord Beaumont sued Lady Aurelia for breach of contract, claiming her love letter promising marriage within the fortnight constituted a binding agreement. The bishop ruled that letters held legal weight only if sealed with episcopal wax, something Lady Aurelia, fearing entrapment, had never done. The case set a precedent. Henceforth, love letters required not only ornate seals, but also notarization by a priest or mayor. Throughout this perilous dance, love letters remained the lifeblood of clandestine romance. They carried earnest sonnets, bawdy limericks, and every crazy gambit a star-crossed heart could dream up. And so, as part 1 draws to a close, imagine the quill trembling in your hand, knowing one misstroke could unleash scandal, imprisonment, or the ire of your sovereign's executioner. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive into coded alphabets, the scandalous love letter guilds, and the one royal decree that outlawed kissing, even in ink. Next up, the secret societies that made Edwardian pen pals look tame, the greatest forging scandal in European history, and how a single misplaced flourish sparked the 100 Years' War. The second installment of our ink-stained odyssey plunges into the labyrinth of secret alphabets, shadowy scribes, and scandalous societies that made medieval love letters far more perilous than today's "I miss you" text. Strap in for clandestine guilds, forged missives that sparked wars, and the one cipher so infamous it was outlawed under penalty of teeth pulling, ciphered tongues and hidden alphabets. From the Pyrenees to Pomerania, lovers swapped unique substitution alphabets carved into bone or scratched on silver discs. One popular scheme, dubbed the Rosicrucian Shuffle by later antiquarians, assigned each letter to a stylized rose petal shape. To outsiders, a love note looked like a botanical fairy tale until you discovered the key hidden in the sender's signet ring. but keys got lost. Lady Blanche of Burgundy infamously misplaced hers at a joust, leading to her love verses falling into her husband's lap in a subsequent scandal known as the scented sonata of regret. Another method used the dancer's cipher, where each character corresponded to a dance step. A curtsy denoted A, a twirl for B, and so on. Courtiers had to perform a short pavane in the courtyard to decode lines, an ordeal that often ended with sprained ankles and egos in tatters. Rumor holds that one suitor, Sir Almeric the Clumsy, fractured his wrist mid-pavane and sent his lady a limping apology, instead of ever thine, ever mine. The love letter, guilds across Europe, secret associations of courtiers and scribes formed, loosely organized love letter guilds. Members paid dues and wax seals and received training in calligraphy, cryptography, and forgery detection. Guild houses, often disguised as inns or apothecaries, offered courses in latticed ligatures and feigning faintness, the latter a technique for diverting attention from suspicious parchment burn marks by dramatically collapsing onto fainting. Couches, guild members swore oaths of confidentiality. Break the bond, and you'd find your fingers blackened by permanent ink stains, or worse, roasted over a brazier until you confessed your rival's secrets. One famous expose involved this guild of the Crimson Quill in Florence. An insider leaked that Grand Mistress Alessandra had been forging love letters from a silk merchant to his wife, instructing her to seduce rival guild members. When the scheme unraveled, Alessandra was forced to write a public apology in her own forged hand, searing her reputation and bicorn-feathered quill into oblivion. The royal edicts and outlawed ciphers. No cipher was more notorious than the monk's mirror, invented at a remote Bavarian monastery. Letters written normally, then copied in reverse so that only a looking-glass could reveal the text. The invention delighted clandestine lovers, until Duke Erhard of Swabia discovered his wife's affair when a footman used a broken looking-glass shard as a doorstop. Furious, the Duke petitioned the Emperor, who issued the Edict of Crystal Clarity in 1424. Any reverse-written epistle, deciphered or not, shall incur the penalty of public flogging and a year's silence in the abbey. From that day, mirror script, devotees risked more than heartbreak, forgery, feuds, and the 100 Years' Crisis. As tensions mounted between England and France, forged love letters became political weapons. English agents imitated French noblewomen's hand to seduce discontented barons into rebellion. In 1368, a batch of counterfeit gallant letters purportedly from the Duchess of Burgundy urged Sir Geoffrey de Clare to murder his sovereign. Clare's ill-fated uprising, known as the Epistolary Uprising, ended in his decapitation, and the forged letters were displayed in Lyons Market Square as a warning to littérateurs and rebel scribes alike. The secret seal-breaking techniques, breaking a seal without leaving visible damage, became an art form. Lovers used heated coins to soften wax, then slid razor-thin strips of deer bladder under the seal to ease it open. One treatise, De Artificiis Librationis Sigilli, detailed how soaking the seal in diluted egg white could make it pliable, but bungled attempts sometimes destroyed the seal's emblem, triggering accusations of treason. In one tragic incident, a minor noblewoman named Lady Cecily attempted to open her fiancé's letter under a pew in Canterbury Cathedral. The noise of crumbling wax startled worshippers into thinking she had struck the marble floor. She was publicly accused of vandalism and spent a fortnight scrubbing church walls with goose feathers. The role of papal and civic notaries. After the Beaumont Aurelia lawsuit set the precedent for notarized love letters, papal and civic notaries became integral to courtship. Notary stations popped up next to public latrines and market stalls, offering on-the-spot seal embossing and oath-taking services. But notaries themselves were susceptible to bribery. A scandal rocked Venice when notary Andrea Bellini was caught affixing his official seal to letters that claimed wives' dowries included entire gondola fleets. His punishment, a year strapped to a gondola's prow through all 4 seasons, freezing winters and sweltering summers alike. The scandal of the naked Duke and the stolen quill. Perhaps the most legendary affair involved Duke Guillaume of Aquitaine. He received an anonymous love letter in midnight black ink, penned so exquisitely that he invited the unknown writer to a rendezvous in the rose garden. Expecting a lady in disguise, he arrived clad only in a silk robe. trading his armor for elegance, only to find a naked goat chewing on an oak sapling and mouthing the letter's last line. "I desire you, but not your dignity." The goat, later dubbed Her Grace the Baroness, dabbed ink from its beard, making off with the Duke's silver quill as it vanished into the darkness. The debacle prompted Guillaume to issue a decree. No epistle shall be accepted without proper illumination and proof of human authorship. Love letters and the perils of preservation. Surviving medieval letters are as rare as intact quill shafts. Humidity, decay, and rodents conspired to destroy most correspondence. Nuns in the Cistercian convent of St. Clair kept a secret trunk of romantic missives, only for it to be devoured by mice during a summer flood. The nuns replaced precious pages with blank parchment and prayed the mice had no taste for rhyme. Yet scholars today still debate whether the survivors are genuine or clever, reconstructions by zealous copyists. The legacy of medieval love letters. By the Renaissance, many of these clandestine practices gave way to more open courtship and printing presses. Yet their legacy endured. Today's encrypted e-cards and hidden messages and Valentine's puzzles owe their lineage to those medieval codemasters and secret seal aficionados. Every time you scribble a love note and slip it into a friend's locker, remember the stakes once involved: decapitation, lifelong penance, or being tarred by a goat. Our journey through hidden alphabets, shadowy guilds, royal edicts, and goat-born pranks concludes here, for now. In Part 3, we'll explore the art of the poetic flourish, the scandalous bathhouse deliveries, and the one letter that changed the course of a dynasty. Until then, keep your quills sharp and your ciphers closer. The day dawned with a parchment-stained dawn chorus, crows pecking shredded love letters from muddy roads. Lady Mabel clutched the remnant of her latest missive, its edges singed by an overzealous notary's embers. She slipped through the servants' corridors, heart pounding like a scribe's quill against vellum, determined to deliver her words of longing to Sir Harlan before his departure on crusade. Every step threatened discovery. A loose floorboard might betray her. A passing valet might glimpse the crimson seal beneath her cloak. She reached the gatehouse and found her courier, a gangly apprentice named Barnaby, whose nose was perpetually dusted with soot and whose loyalty was as reliable as a dying candle. Barnaby squinted at the letter and asked, "Does this rhyme scheme violate the new bishop's edict on alliterative love poetry?" Mabel hissed that he should worry about rats instead, for the letter contained not only declarations of devotion, but instructions for a secret rendezvous by the old herb garden at midnight. Under cover of twilight, Barnaby pedaled a rickety mule toward the knight's barracks, the letter strapped in a leather tube at his waist. Along the way, he encountered a troupe of traveling minstrels who paused to offer him ale in exchange for Barnaby's goosequill pen. He declined, barely, and continued on, full of dread for what awaited him at the barracks. Any guard might ask him to recite the local tax code, or worse, demand to read the letter himself. Meanwhile, Sir Harlan sat beside a dying hearth, massaging the ache in his shoulder where his lance had grazed a Turk's helm. He wore half armor and half widow's sorrow. His beloved Mabel's final letter had promised news, possibly an heirloom brooch, or, at best, a new rhyme. He longed for her words like a parched traveler craves water, unaware that Barnaby was still weaving through the dark lanes of the manor. Back in the capital, Master Scribe Roland prepared his next flourish. He would compose for Lady Isolde the grandest acrostic ever seen, encoding her name down the margin of every line. He dipped his quill into ink infused with ground peacock feathers, guaranteed to shimmer like sunlit tears, and began to write. Each capital letter soared above the text in ornate loops and curls, as though the parchment itself yearned to kiss those words. But Roland's hand shook from too many nights studying cipher textbooks by candlelight, and one misplaced swirl transformed Isolde's name into the archaic word for rotten turnip. He cursed so loudly that the chapel choir paused mid-hymn, speculating whether disillusioned scribes could also suffer from gout. While Roland fretted over his botched acrostic, Lady Isolde rehearsed her response. She owned a small collection of scented wafers, thin slips of parchment perfumed with rose oil. She would write her reply on one wafer and fold it into a hollow comb, placing it atop the vanity of her chambermaid. When the comb was passed to Roland, ostensibly for hair care, he would discover her answer, a delicate poem promising moonlit walks and a clandestine kiss beneath the spiced apple tree. But Isolde's chambermaid, jealous of her mistress's station, swapped the wafer for a bill of indictment from the local apothecary. Roland received news that Isolde demanded payment for every poem he wrote, an insult calculated to break his heart and his purse. Across the channel, in a windswept keep, Lord Geoffrey plotted the greatest epistolary coup of his generation. He would intercept the secret correspondence between the king's favorite minstrel and the queen's lady-in-waiting, letters rumored to carry whispered plots against the throne. Disguised as a humble water carrier, Geoffrey smuggled himself into the stew shed, where those guilty parties bathed nightly. As steam curled around naked limbs, he fished their letters from the water with hooked rods, dripping ink and treachery from their pages. The queen's laughter at one seductive stanza revealed her complicity. The minstrel's hubris at rhyming heart with depart confirmed his loyalty to the crown. With that evidence, Geoffrey secured land grants, a barony, and the lifelong gratitude of the monarch, though he never again dared to attend a public bath without armor. Back home, Mabel's letter finally reached Sir Harland, only to fall into the impatient hands of his sergeant, who tore it open expecting news of reinforcements. Instead, he found instructions to meet at the herb garden. Furious at being outwitted, the sergeant seized Barnaby and the mule, forcing them to dig up the messenger's grave in the camp cemetery, just to prove his authority. Harland refused to intervene, claiming that pleasure gardens and trenches were best left to women and clerks. Barnaby was spared decapitation by mere hours, but his mule was pressed into service as the new courier, proof that trust was rarer than unscarred armor. While these dramas unfolded, the greatest love letter scandal of the century brewed in Burgundy. Duchess Aveline commissioned an epic sonnet cycle from the poet Moreton, instructing him to reference the ancient myths of Aphrodite and Mars. Moreton, ever ambitious, decided to outdo himself. He wove into his verses a prophecy that any lover sharing her letters would bring ruin upon their house within 7 days. Aveline received the completed cycle, marveling at its beauty, until her husband discovered it in her closet and recognized the omen. He accused her of cursing his lineage and filed for annulment. At the trial, Moreton defended himself by claiming artistic license. The prophecy was metaphorical, describing the evolution of love rather than literal doom. The Duke was unconvinced and banished both poet and parchment-burning pyre from his duchy. The sonnet survived only in illicit copies circulated by romantics and gossip-mongers, testaments to how a single flourish can topple marriages. Across the border in Castile, a secret society known as the Coy Quills met monthly in a walled garden lit by torches. Members included widows, priests, and one exiled jester. Their purpose, to exchange perfected love letter techniques and to critique each other's verses over cups of rancid almond wine. They devised the Persian parchment fold, a method of origami that hid 6 pages of confessions within a single sheet. They pioneered scented inks infused with cinnamon that would warm the recipient's cheek when read aloud. They even debated the ethics of love letters delivered by automaton doves, clockwork birds rumored to peck at letters and deliver them with mechanical precision. When their clubhouse was raided by an overeager inquisitor seeking heretics, the Quills escaped with only minor singeing of their cloaks, and a newfound determination to develop iodine-based invisible inks. Meanwhile, in a modest cottage outside Rouen, Brother Lucien, a monk with a penchant for romantic verse, faced the ultimate apostolic dilemma. He had fallen in love with Sister Helena, the convent's gardener and expert on thorn bushes. Their only outlet was letters smuggled through the confession grill, each penned on scraps of discarded mass book pages. Lucien wrote of moonlit pruning sessions and the poetry of bending rose canes to form heart shapes. Helena responded with haiku about the first sprigs of lavender in summer. But at the height of their secret courtship, the abbess discovered the exchange. Helena's final letter lay hidden in Lucien's breviary, its edges still damp with tears. Both were condemned to separate cells for a year. Lucien to copy penitential psalms and Helena to weed the abbey's herb garden until her fingers bled. Their letters were burned in the cloister hearth, their ashes scattered over the fields as a warning that even ink can condemn souls. As these tales attest, medieval love letters were more than mere tokens of affection. They could topple governments, bankrupt poets, provoke duels at dawn, and curse entire houses with ill-fated prophecies. Poets required bodyguards, couriers needed safe conducts, recipients had to vet every quill for poison or X-marked rupture lines. Even the act of reading a beloved's handwriting demanded preparation. Fresh, foregone hangover, shielded windows to block prying eyes, and an antidote for ink that contained belladonna. And yet, despite every hazard, from cursed ciphers to goat-induced insults, the written word remained the ultimate declaration of passion. When Sir Harlan finally found Mabel in the herb garden, they exchanged no pleasantries. He held out the letter Barnaby had risked his life to deliver. Mabel, her hand trembling, broke the seal with a single fingernail. Harlan read aloud, "My dearest knight, whose valor in battle pales only beside your valor in kindness, let us carve our names on bark, and let no scholar's mirror nor petty sergeant unbind this vow." He closed the letter, gazed at Mabel, and kissed her so fiercely that nearby nettle bushes trembled. In that stolen moment, amid thistles and moonlight, they knew the risks were worth it, that every smuggled verse, every coded confession, and every near miss with scandal had led them here. They pressed the letter between 2 leaves of lavender and buried it beneath the old apple tree, a time capsule of devotion sealed with soil and hope. Thus concludes part 3 of our exploration into the secrets behind medieval love letters. Keep your quills sharpened, your seals unbroken, and remember, in the Middle Ages, a single miswritten word could ignite a war, or forge an unbreakable bond. The final days of parchment and passion unfurled like a tattered banner in the wind, as our lovers confronted the ultimate fate of medieval love letters: preservation, peril, and posterity. With wars raging, borders shifting, and libraries consumed by fire, the fragility of ink met the tenacity of human longing. Those who survived the trials of seal breaking and cipher cracking now faced the greatest test, keeping their words alive against the relentless march of time. When Lord Harlan and Lady Mabel wed beneath the apple tree, they bound their vows not only by ring and kiss, but by entombing their letter in a lead-lined casket. Buried under lavender-scented soil, the missive remained untouched for decades, until their great-granddaughter, Lady Eleanor, unearthed it during a famine. She found the parchment waterlogged, but legible. The ink's iron gall faded to a ghostly gray. Recognizing its power, Eleanor commissioned a scribe to copy the text onto fresh vellum, adding marginalia that traced each ancestor's deeds. Thus, one love letter became the cornerstone of the family chronicle, a testament to resilience amid plague, famine, and marauding knights. Archival practices varied wildly. Monastic scriptoria sometimes preserved romantic correspondence alongside sacred texts, believing that true love mirrored divine love. At the Abbey of St. Gale, librarians stored sealed bundles of letters in oak chests, stacking them beneath illuminated gospels. Over centuries, damp and candle soot blackened the parchment edges. Only the thickest seals held firm. When archaeologists pried open the chests centuries later, they discovered fragments of poetry enough to reconstruct lost dialects and trace the evolution of courtly love. Scholars marveled that an ostensibly secular text could survive when entire theological works perished in Viking raids. Elsewhere, civic record offices claimed ownership of love letters once they reached their destination. A 1442 petition in Burgundian archives listed dozens of confiscated missives deemed too inflammatory or fraudulent. Officials burned the most scandalous, letters promising clandestine weddings, threatening duels, or extolling forbidden desires. They kept the less provocative in bound volumes, publicly accessible to any citizen willing to pay a modest fee in groats. Town criers advertised upcoming love letter auctions, where admirers could bid on heartfelt confessions penned by local barmaids or itinerant scribes. These auctions spurred confusion when bidders discovered their own names immortalized in unwanted romance. Not all letters met paper's end by design. The practice of letter burial extended beyond families. Secret societies, like the Coy Quills, held vow renewals at holy wells, where members sank their correspondence into water to seal them with the earth's own memory. Some emerged centuries later, fished by modern anglers who mistook the rolled-up scrolls for lost fishing tackle. Deciphering worm-eaten texts required digital imaging and multispectral analysis, techniques unimaginable to medieval scribes. Yet the thrill remained. Each recovered verse offered a window into a love that neither time nor tide could fully erase. Technical innovations evolved to combat decay. Renaissance humanists introduced parchment sizing, applying layers of gelatin or egg wash to repel moisture. They experimented with deacidifying washes, rinsing pages in weak lime solutions to neutralize the ink's corrosive acidity. In Florence's famed Biblioteca Medici, librarians swapped out failing parchments for printed facsimiles by 1500, centuries before movable type printed the first mass-produced love manual. These early preservationists argued that love letters merited as much care as sacred relics. Their efforts saved treasures like the Petrarch Laura correspondence, whose survival shaped modern notions of romantic idealism. But preservation invited theft. Throughout the 15th century, bibliophile bandits targeted convents, monasteries, and private libraries, rumored to house love letter caches. One notorious gang, the Smudged Ink Consortium, used makeshift crowbars and acid mixtures to breach iron-bound chests without breaking seals. They stole letters penned by queens to knights, abbesses to bishops, and merchants to mistresses, reselling them to collectors who prized scandal. Their crime spree ended when a priest tracked the gang to a wine cellar in Valencia, recovering letters still stained with the thieves' fingerprints. The consortium's downfall led to new security measures, vaults with labyrinthine locks, guard rotations, and even more absurdly, mechanical hummingbird locks that required the correct melody to open. Meanwhile, letter writing itself fell under scrutiny as printing presses proliferated. Pamphlets offered standard love letter templates in multiple languages, complete with blank spaces for names and customizable flattery. Courtiers decried the soullessness of prefab passion. They staged duels between original scribes and letter merchants, proclaiming that genuine devotion could never be outsourced to typeset. These performative disputes fueled a brief renaissance of personalized calligraphy. Master penmen adorned each missive with hand-drawn flourishes, entwined hearts, miniature castles, and even tiny portraits of the sender in minuscule profile. Such ornamentation deterred forgers and celebrated individuality, though it raised the cost of love letters to princely sums. Not all innovation served romance. The 16th century invention of mercurial inks, mixed with corrosive salts to produce bold, lasting black, proved disastrous. In several Italian archives, entire volumes of letters disintegrated as the mercury ate through the parchment. Researchers now recognize these inks' toxicity, but at the time, their permanence was celebrated. Lovers boasted that their words would outlive empires and evoke remembrance in posterity. Instead, those same words burned through binding threads, spilled onto adjacent pages, and vanished into history's chemical crucible. Surviving letters often traveled far from their origin. Crusaders carried correspondence to the Holy Land, only to find local scriptoriums copying, translating, and sometimes adapting them for local elites. A letter by an English knight to his lady in Dorset might arrive in Acre glossed, with Arabic-influenced marginal drawings of lions and palm fronds. These cross-cultural hybrids illustrate how love transcended language and geography, even when the original Latin eroded into Middle Eastern dialects. Modern philologists reconstruct such texts by comparing multilingual fragments, a diplomatic puzzle with pieces scattered across continents. Love letters also fueled continental politics. Royal marriages often began over written proposals, each clause negotiated line by line. A Habsburg princess's letter to the Spanish court specified not only her dowry, but personal preferences. The number of linens per week, preferred window orientation for morning light, and acceptable subjects for chaperone conversation. Ambassadors dispatched back and forth drafts on specially fast horses outrunning storms and bandits. One famous diplomatic courier, Alonso de Cespedes, died on the road clutching a half-finished missive that proposed a dynastic union. His final beatification later hinged on whether his letters had facilitated peace or plotted betrayal. With the Baroque era, the emphasis shifted from secrecy to spectacle. Love letters became showpieces in salons, displayed on velvet cushions during intimate gatherings, read aloud by professional declaimers who interpreted each flourish and sigh. Attendees judged the quality of rhyme, the cleverness of metaphor, and the tact of politeness. Women's circles rated delivery methods, scented parchments earned extra points. Letters delivered by silk gloves scored higher than those handed in leather pouches. The extravagance reached its peak when the Sun King, Louis XIV, requested the love letters of his mistresses be bound into a grand livre d'amour, a volume so lavish that its gilt-edged pages remain in Versailles today, under lock and key. Artisans found new life reproducing love letters in decorative forms. Porcelain plaques engraved with favorite verses, tapestries woven with stitched excerpts, jewelry boxes lined with micro-engraved vellum. A Spanish courtier wore a heart-shaped locket containing a scrap of his beloved's handwriting, preserved under crystal. Such objets d'art transformed private sentiment into public fashion statements. Yet many of these relics collapsed under lost context. Modern curators display them without a knowledge of their stories, treating them as generic symbols rather than windows into specific relationships. By the Enlightenment, letter writing faced competition from the epistolary novel. Readers craved fictional exchanges brimming with sentiment and scandal. Writers like Richardson and Rousseau crafted entire novels through letters, some penned by characters who felt more alive than historical figures whose real letters lay decaying in archives. Paradoxically, fiction's success saved the epistolary form. Public appetite for letters sustained stationery industries, postal reforms, and even led to the establishment of dedicated postal museums, preserving authentic letters in climate-controlled vaults. The Postal Revolution democratized love letters. Cheap stamps made courtship available to common folk. Sewing circles in London exchanged affections by mail. Industrious lovers in rural America paddled letters down canal boats to bypass slow coaches. Each letter carried news of births, deaths, and migrating relatives, reinforcing that the tradition of love correspondence was inseparable from the fundamentals of human connection. As the 19th century dawned, photography entered the scene. Carte de visite portraits accompanied letters, allowing lovers to gaze upon each other's faces across oceans. Albumin prints slipped into envelopes beside folded love poems. The marriage of image and text echoed medieval practices of enclosed lockets, but with greater realism. Some couples enshrined these photographs and letters together in elaborate keepsake albums, early scrapbooks that preserved love across decades and provided genealogists with vivid glimpses of family histories. By the 20th century, airmail accelerated courtship letters to jet-propelled speeds. Lovers drafted daily dispatches describing trench warfare, factory rhythms, and the mundane struggles of modern life. Their words, less ornate but no less heartfelt, built on medieval foundations of coded longing and scavenged materials. Today's digital love letters, emails, texts, emojis, owe their lineage to those first shaky quill strokes on uneven vellum. The desire to connect, to declare devotion, to risk scandal for the sake of intimacy remains unchanged. In this final act, we honor the unsung heroes of medieval correspondence, the anonymous scribes, the daring couriers, the clandestine archivists who rescued words from oblivion. Their efforts remind us that love letters are more than ink on skin. They are artifacts of hope, courage, and the indomitable human spirit. Each broken seal recovered, each cipher cracked, each charred scrap deciphered breathes life into voices, long silenced by stone walls and shifting borders. And so we close our four-part odyssey through the secrets behind medieval love letters. Let these stories inspire you to cherish your own messages of affection, whether scrawled on paper, typed on screens, or whispered across a cafe table. In every age, the written word remains the truest vessel of the heart, carrying our deepest yearnings through the storms of time into the waiting hands of another soul. Whoever holds your letters holds not just your words, but the fragile promise of love itself. Picture this, you and your crush sharing a communal chamber pot, where getting to know you involves eyeing someone else's night soil for clues about last night's feast. That's right, medieval lovers celebrated romance by sniffing urine, smearing dung for beauty treatments, and trading lice-infested combs like tokens of devotion. Buckle up as we plunge into the first chapter of the weirdest hygiene rituals you never knew possible, where love stank so bad it became its own aphrodisiac. In the grimy heart of medieval Europe, cleanliness was optional, hygiene was hazardous, and romance thrived on the ugliest of habits. For starters, let's talk about courtship by chamber pot. Noble couples sometimes invited one another into the Lord's privy, a cramped wooden box perched over a cesspit, to whisper sweet nothings as they relieved themselves. Why? Because surviving shared embarrassment built intimacy. As the stink rose in swirling eddies, lovers laughed through tears, collaboratively swatting away flies and praying no one slipped into the black mire below. Surgeons later noted that couples who shared a chamber pot showed stronger bonds, though likely because neither dared stray too far from someone who knew their bowel habits. Next up, the lice love token. Before roses and chocolates, knights presented ladies with combs plucked from their greatcoats, infested with live lice as proof of closeness. The more lice clinging to the teeth, the deeper the devotion. A single comb could harbor dozens of these tiny squatters, prompting elaborate rituals to transfer them safely. The lady would cradle the comb overnight in a scented pouch, then nestle it beneath her pillow, hoping the lice would infest only her beloved's lute strings and not her own hair. If she succeeded, it meant mutual affection. If she failed, she risked a week of maddening scratching in public. Ever heard of dung facials of devotion? Wealthy suitors believed that certain animal manures, when mixed with honey and mustard seed, made miraculous face masks. Applied liberally, these pastes promised smoother skin, though in reality they smelled like rotten oats and attracted every barnyard insect within a half-mile radius. Lovers applied the dung masks side by side, hoping shared humiliation would spark romance. Some couples even held dung date nights, lighting candles around the tub and serenading each other while slathered in cow droppings. The less vain partner who declined to wash first was deemed the truest in affection. "I love you so much, I'll sit in goat poop to prove it." Then there was the bizarre practice of urine bouquet. Since perfumes were expensive, enterprising lovers collected their own or each other's urine in small clay flasks, then aged it in leather sacks until it developed a sweet wine-like aroma. A favorite trick: drop a few drops of aged urine onto a handkerchief and press it to your lover's nose as a greeting. If they inhaled deeply and sighed, the fragrance passed the test. If they recoiled, you risked public humiliation. But at least you saved a fortune on rose petals. For those craving a more tactile approach, snail slime elixirs were all the rage. Young couples chased slimy garden snails at dawn, gathering their mucus trails on smooth stones. The saliva-rich goo was believed to tighten skin and impart a youthful glow, an attractive quality when trying to woo someone unaccustomed to human features. Partners coated each other's cheeks with the glistening slime, giggling as they slipped and slid around the courtyard. Success meant supple skin. Failure meant a snail colony moving into your hair by week's end. Let's not forget the dreaded bloodletting as bonding. Medieval medicine dictated that optimal health, and thus optimal scent, depended on balanced humors. Love-sick knights would invite their paramours to oversee venesection sessions. Watching someone bleed, enduring faintness together, sharing the same healing vinegar compress, created a morbid intimacy. Some couples even exchanged leeches, each wearing a tiny leather pouch with a living leech as a token of their shared vitality. Talk about commitment. You couldn't call it quits without risking infection. On the peasant level, mud bath matrimony reigned supreme. Villagers believed that wallowing in river mud reduced fevers and enhanced fertility. Newlyweds would strip down and submerge themselves in the nearest stream bed, emerging painted head to toe in gloopy sludge. They'd parade through the fields, hand in hand, daring each other to kiss without smearing their masks. If a couple could endure 3 river baths without complaining, they earned the community's blessing, and a lifetime supply of teasing about their muddy honeymoon. Then came tooth-powdered vows. Since brushing teeth was unknown, lovers concocted abrasive powders from crushed oyster shells, burnt eggshells, and powdered brick. They'd stand face to face, blowing the gritty mix into each other's mouths with feather quills, an act so irritating it guaranteed mutual tears and near-choking fits. If both partners survived the ordeal without cursing the other, their bond was declared unbreakable. Some even inscribed their initials on each other's teeth with the gritty dust, an awkward tattoo lasting until the next rainstorm. For those with more resources, mercury baths of matrimony offered lethal luxury. High-born pairs soaked together in tubs of mercury-infused hot water, believing that the heavy metal purified skin and cured ailments. Of course, mercury poisoning led to tremors, hallucinations, and general madness. But couples saw this as a shared adventure. Holding hands atop a mercury wave, their trembling circuits in sync, they reveled in the notion that love conquers all, even a neurotoxin. Finally, no medieval love story was complete without the perfumed armpit kiss. Lovers believed that a person's body odor held the key to compatibility. They'd lift each other's arms, sniff deeply, and rate the scent on a scale from freshly heralded night to rat-infested latrine. A favorable rating warranted a kiss planted squarely in the pit, thought to imbue the kisser with the loved one's vital essence. A poor rating led to polite rejection. I adore you, but perhaps not in the armpit. These rituals may sound grotesque today, but in a world without deodorant, toothpaste, or private bathrooms, medieval lovers invented the weirdest ways to show affection. They embraced the absurd, risked disease and celebrated romance in the face of literal filth. As we wrap up part 1, remember, true love in the Middle Ages meant sharing your worst smells, your most hazardous treatments, and your deepest humiliations, all for the chance at a kiss that smelled only slightly worse than yesterday's ale. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll explore the scandalous employment of smelly dress trials, the aphrodisiacal powers of rotted meat massages, and the baffling craze of hair-pulling declarations of ardor. Love may have stunk, but it never failed to intrigue. The sun rises on another glorious day of medieval romance, an equally glorious stench. In part 2 of our plunge into bizarre courtship cleanliness, we'll wade through the smelly dress trials, the rotted meat massages, hair-pulling declarations, and other absurd rituals that convinced lovers they were bonding, even as they nearly poisoned one another. Smelly dress trials of devotion. Long before laundry day was invented, medieval couples gauged compatibility by who could bear each other's muskiest garments. A suitor would don his oldest tunic, so steeped in sweat and smoke it could fell a horse, and present it to his beloved for inspection. She, in turn, pressed the fabric to her face and sniffed with solemn concentration. If she didn't faint, he passed the trial and earned the right to borrow her shift, a coarse linen underdress, for the next sniff test. Some nobles elevated this to ritual drama. Under torchlight, the suitor danced in his rancid doublet as minstrels drummed, while the lady attempted to sing a love ballad through her tears, tears born of both emotion and olfactory assault. Passing the smelly dress trial became a badge of true love. If you can endure my body odor, you deserve my heart. Rotted meat massages, the ultimate aphrodisiac. In certain frontier keeps, health-obsessed barons experimented with carnal carnage. Therapy. They fermented meat, usually boar or venison, in sealed barrels until it stank of ammonia and labeled it elixir of carnality. Couples then slathered the rotted paste onto one another like a grotesque spa treatment, convinced its potent fumes would arouse passion. Think fine wine meets decomposing pheasant, spread liberally from shoulder to hip. After a vigorous meat massage, pairings would retreat behind closed doors with a jug of ale, hoping the heady aroma translated to heated desire. Unsurprisingly, many reported migraines, hallucinations of dancing boars, and unintended trips to the apothecary for anti-venom, yet they proclaimed it worth the risk in the name of love. Hair-pulling declarations of ardor, forget gentle hand-holding. Medieval lovers proved devotion through symmetrical hair-pulling. Each partner grasped a tuft of the other's hair, braided or loose, and tugged in unison while reciting vows. The harder the pull, the deeper the promise. In rural regions, villagers would time these duets. Midwives officiated, measuring the distance of yanked hair to indicate sincerity. Overzealous participants sometimes left each other bald patches or torn scalps, but surviving without calling for a midwife was seen as evidence of true affection. Pastoral ballads praised couples who tore each other's tresses for tender trueness, while local healers sold salves to soothe the resulting scalp wounds. Onion garland courtship. When roses wilted and lilies withered, lovers turned to onions, cheap, pungent, and guaranteed to make eyes water. They braided strands of small onions into loops and presented them as garlands. The recipient wore the onion crown for a full day. If they could endure the tears and breath assaults without complaining, they signaled readiness for deeper intimacy. Public onion garland ceremonies became common at village fairs. Young suitors donned garlands for doting maidens to drape around their necks. Those who relieved the suitor of his crown prematurely were deemed mercenary. Those who criticized the smell risked being labeled unromantic. The onion garland thus served as a pungent test of endurance and sentiment. Tooth-blackening beauty ritual. Bright white teeth were taboo to medieval sensibilities. Gleaming ivory signaled witchcraft. Instead, beauty lay in darkness. Couples sometimes collaborated on tooth-blackening concoctions made from burnt wine leaves, soot, and vinegar. Each evening, the lovers sat together brushing their teeth with charred sticks, coating enamel in pitch-black lacquer. As they gossiped about courtly intrigues, they admired each other's glossy ebony grins in small copper mirrors. The more thoroughly blackened the smile, the more fashionable and the more bonded the pair felt. Smiles flashed like inky beacons of devotion, attracting both envy and accusations of diabolism from local priests. Ear-cleaning flirtations. Communal ear-cleaning was a surprisingly intimate pastime. Equipped with slender bronze picks and tiny feather dusters, lovers would take turns extricating wax from each other's ears. The closer one had to lean, the more tantalizing the encounter. A silky earlobe brush indicated trust. A careless dig risking pain meant recklessness in love. Some wrote poems describing the honeyed harvest of earwax, interpreting the color and consistency as omens for long life or fertile offspring. Gossip spread of ear-cleaning salons run by widowed noblewomen, where the fee was a peck on the cheek, and possibly the promise of a second cleaning session under the guise of medical necessity. Bed sharing in sewage-filled trenches. In besieged fortresses, bedding resources dwindled. Starving couples sometimes shared straw mattresses laid atop trench latrines covered with wooden boards. Romance in such conditions proved endurance. If you could sleep beside someone amid the stench of human waste, surely you could endure any marital hardship. Soldiers reported whispered sweet nothings exchanged through slits in the boards, while a midwife's off-duty delivered secret midnight blessings to those wed in squalor. Legend holds that one soldier married his sweetheart atop a cesspit during a plague siege, declaring, "Our bond shall stink forever," and went on to father 12 children, none of whom spoke until age 5. Fecal eyebrow dyeing for unity. Astonishingly, some cultures used colored excrement to tint eyebrows. Rabbit droppings mixed with plant pigments created earthy hues, dark chocolate browns and olive greens. Couples, hoping to match souls, dyed each other's eyebrows in this paste, counting strokes in unison. The resulting smoky arches framed eyes like sinister brackets, but the shared ritual forged lasting bonds. Over time, the dye would fade, an apt metaphor for fleeting youth, but the memory of staining rituals endured as proof of sacrificial affection. Maggot-infested bandage exchange. In rare medical bonding ceremonies, romantic pairs took turns applying maggot-infested dressings to one another's wounds. Medieval surgeons prized maggots for debriding necrotic flesh. Lovers believed sharing these writhing helpers signified mutual healing. One partner's torn shoulder might be wrapped first, then after a day, the dressing, crawling with larvae, would be carefully transferred to the other's skin. Surviving without developing sepsis or vomiting on sight was seen as ultimate commitment. Local surgeons sometimes officiated these exchanges, charging a silver penny plus a promised kiss upon successful removal of the maggots. Mud brick slip vows. In riverine villages, newly betrothed couples built small ceremonial altars of mud bricks. Each brick was coated in a wet clay slip, tinted with ochre or charcoal, applied by both partners simultaneously. The slip, sticky, cold, and greasy, symbolized the blending of lives. As the altar dried in the sun, villagers recited oaths of fealty. Couples then chipped away pieces of the altar together, chewing them like ritual candy, an act believed to bind them physically and spiritually. The graham cracker-like taste of sun-baked clay was a small price to pay for mutual endurance. Raw fish scalp masks for fertility. In fishing towns, young wives seeking fertility smeared each other's scalps with crushed raw fish. The slimy, fishy paste was thought to open pores and attract baby spirits. Lovers applied the masks side by side, hands slippery with cod or herring, then wrapped their heads in seaweed. After an hour, they rinsed off in the harbor tide, hoping the aroma of salt water and fish lingered like a talisman. While the practice often resulted in urchin pricks and cuttlefish ink stains, participants swore by its potency, passing the fish mask technique down through generations. Nose-piercing vows with iron spikes. In certain warrior clans, couples sealed their bond by piercing each other's nostrils with small iron spikes, both a test of pain tolerance and a lifelong symbol of union. The piercings formed dainty loops when rings were inserted, glinting in torchlight as lovers embraced. The ritual required a steady hand. One wrong angle could perforate the septum or trigger blood poisoning. Successful nose spiking was celebrated with a feast, guests sipping mead through their own nose rings to honor the couple's bravery. Shared fart counting competitions. Perhaps the most ludicrous, fart counting as a courtship sport. Couples sat back to back by a hearth, each challenged to produce the loudest or most pungent emission. A neutral judge, often the local jester, awarded points for volume, length, and odor potency. The winning partner claimed bragging rights in the next peck on the lips. The loser had to endure 3 pecks on the forehead. Though unsanitary, the competition provided endless amusement and tested both digestive fortitude and mutual tolerance, essential qualities for any long-term relationship. As Part 2 draws to a close, consider how medieval lovers transformed the most revolting aspects of bodily existence into rituals of connection. From eating clay bricks to bartering maggots, they embraced absurdity and risked disease for fleeting moments of shared intimacy. In a world without showers, deodorant, or scented candles, love meant getting up close and personal, often too personal. Join us in Part 3 as we dive into aromatic apothecary orgies, live animal hot stone treatments, and the scandalous intimate infusion ceremonies that turned medieval courtship into a carnival of questionable health and undeniable romance. Love may have stank, but it never failed to astonish. The legacy of medieval lovers' hygiene horrors continued in Part 3 with ever more outlandly rituals, each designed to test trust, endurance, and one's tolerance for biological warfare under the banner of romance. Brace yourselves for apothecary orgies, hot stone critter therapies, and elixir ceremonies that blurred the line between courtship and contagion. Aromatic apothecary orgies. In bustling towns, guilds of apothecaries held monthly fragrant symposia where aspiring couples tested their compatibility amid vats of pungent brews. Each pair donned linen shifts steeped in concoctions of asafoetida, dried fish, and musk pods, swirling like a noxious perfume cloud. They then entered communal steam domes, barrel-shaped wooden huts with slatted floors, beneath which bundles of aromatic herbs burned ferociously. Lovers alternated plunging their heads into rising fumes of frankincense, castoreum, and rotting mandrake root, attempting to outlast each other's gag reflex. The last partner standing without vomiting or passing out earned a clay medallion etched with 2 clasped hands, a booby prize prized only by those immune to respiratory collapse. Physicians claimed the ritual opened nasal passages and balanced humors. Critics called it biochemical warfare disguised as foreplay. Live animal hot stone treatments, seeking to combine relief of aching muscles with intimate touch, some adventurous. Couples adopted vivarium lithotherapy. They heated smooth river stones atop open hearths, then introduced small, harmless reptiles, geckos, salamanders, and even baby tortoises onto the stones. The creatures warmed themselves, and lovers would gather the live stones, placing them atop each other's backs in a practice half massage, half creature wrangling. The warmth soothed sore shoulders, while the gentle scuttle of reptilian limbs awakened nerve endings. To heighten the thrill, exotic fibernet hammocks suspended above the hearth allowed partners to lie in proximity, exchanging whispered vows as they adjusted live stone placements to avoid accidentally cooking the small beasts. Some participants later reported mild burns, reptile bites, and vivid dreams of gecko armies. Nonetheless, it became a favorite among borderland knights pining for home comforts. Intimate infusion ceremonies. In regions famed for herbal lore, couples commissioned passion infusions at local apothecaries. Roots of valerian, nightshade berries, and handfuls of crumbled rose petals were steeped in water drawn at dawn, then poured over lovers' heads like a ritual baptism. Participants stood within wooden frames strung with hanging vials. As the infusion dripped through the jar mouths, it collected in a basin at their feet. Couples then kneeled together, sipping the runoff as a shared sacrament of ardor. Many professed to feel increased warmth and blurred vision. Some suffered violent headaches, tremors, or unexpected horticultural urges. One duchess famously tried to plant a hedge of lavender in her ballroom after an overly potent infusion. Despite occasional hospitalization, the ceremony persisted as a symbol of unity. 2 hearts steeped in the same strange brew. The worm water circuit. To prove steadfastness in adversity, suitors entered the rift of vermicular initiation. A long wooden trough was filled with tepid water and handfuls of earthworms excavated from local fields. Each lover waded in barefoot, then navigated a zigzag plank path submerged just beneath the surface. The slimy worms writhed between toes as partners sought each other's eyes in the murk, reciting pledges of fidelity. At the end of the circuit, they dipped hands into the muck to exchange ring tokens carved from oak. Completion without shrieking or dropping the ring was considered proof of mutual resolve. Rival couples gambled on times and number of squished worms. Victors awarded a silver ladle to scoop future worm water baths. Candle wax drip confessions. In candlelit chapels, confessors adapted their duties into romantic rites. A slender metal hook suspended 2 beeswax candles above a pew. Lovers knelt side by side, clasping hands while a priest or abbess recited litanies of contrition and passion. At prescribed moments, molten drops of scented wax, infused with ambergris or juniper oil, fell onto their joined fingers. Without flinching, they counted each bead of wax, their intertwined hands a testament to shared pain. 6 drops signified, "I endure for you." 10 meant, "I sacrifice for you." And 14 declared, "I choose you above all." Those who yanked away too soon faced public admonishment. Those who endured full heights of accumulation had to bear peeled skin. For days, as a reminder of devotion's sting. Toenail bookmark exchange. Few puzzles tested intimacy like the ungual exchange. Couples each clipped a single toenail, cleaned in vinegar to prevent infection, then pressed it between 2 pages of a treasured book. After sealing the pages shut with glue derived from boiled rabbit skin, they presented the volume to one another as a keepsake. Retrieving one's own nail months later required a gentle sawing of the book's spine. Failure risked destroying the text. The ritual symbolized mutual trust, the willingness to sacrifice a part of one's flesh in service of shared stories. Successful exchanges often sparked pilgrimage to monasteries to recite psalms of thanks for nails' painless regrowth. Blowfly tournament of courtship. For those immune to revolting spectacle, the blowfly tournament offered a communal spectacle. Large glass domes housed live blowflies harvested near refuse heaps. Couples took turns entering the dome and attempting to catch a single blowfly on a folded cloth, nostrils pinched and mouth guarded against surprise landings. The event was timed. Fastest catcher earned a kiss from every participant of the opposite sex. Prizes included small cups of mead and earthenware fly traps etched with lovers' initials. Physicians cautioned that inhaling fly-borne pathogens could lead to fever. Participants scoffed, boasting of the tournament's ability to purify nostrils and spark laughter in the face of death. Blood-scented love. Letters, building on the ritual of bloodletting as bonding. Some lovers infused their written vows with drops of their own blood. A fine quill dabbed into a syringe of capillary blood created words flushed in crimson. The recipient, advised to carry the letter beneath her shift close to skin, believed the faint metallic scent would kindle passion when read under candlelight. To seal authenticity, lovers pricked their pinky fingers to place tiny droplets on the trailing ends of lines, creating microscopic love seals. But iron-rich ink hastened parchment decay. Many letters self-destructed within months. Still, the few survivors, ambered by age, speak today of the visceral thrill of reading words literally written in flesh. Communal spit swapping, salutes, spit, not wine, became a communal currency in some diminutive communities. During village fairs, young couples converged at long wooden tables, dipping thin reeds into communal goblets of water. Each lover would fill the goblet halfway with their own saliva, then stir with the reed and share the mixture with their partner. If neither gagged or spat it back, they were deemed worthy of the festival's blessing. Elders warned that sharing spit spread disease. Romantics countered that only the doubly devoted dared taste one another's essence so intimately. The festival ended with a collective gargle, and occasional chesty coughs in subsequent weeks. Moss-bed confessional retreats. In forest hamlets, moss-lined huts served as retreats for newlywed couples. Thick mats of cushiony sphagnum moss covered floors and benches. Couples reclined together, sharing whispered confessions of past infidelities or secret dreams, their voices softened by moss's dampening embrace. The hut's door remained locked for 3 hours, discouraging prying ears. Moss's moisture purportedly absorbed unclean thoughts. When couples emerged, they sprinkled handfuls of the same moss on each other's heads, symbolizing absolution and renewed trust. Some moss beds became pilgrimage sites. Travelers seeking absolution begged couples for a sprig of the love moss to take home for their own budding romances, kissing through decaying leaf veils to test the power of affection over revulsion. Some couples met in leaf-strewn groves, crafting thin veils of partially decomposed foliage. Each veil, woven from brown, mottled leaves, was draped over the wearer's face before kissing. If the kiss survived the moldy, earthy flavors trapped between the damp leaves and the lip, the couple was declared beyond skin deep. Sponsors offered small silken ribbons as prizes for those whose kisses lasted longest without gagging. Local healers cautioned that inhaling mold spores could induce respiratory distress. Lovers argued it brought them closer to life's decay and rebirth. Eye sniff, testing for fidelity. Inspired by the armpit kiss, some communities adapted a variation, the ocular olfactory test. Lovers removed outer eye drops of collyrium, white lead paste used to treat eye infections, and collected the residue on slender glass rods. They then sniffed one another's rods, attempting to divine emotional state. A sharp, sour odor signified jealousy. A sweet, faint aroma suggested contentment. Couples who matched each other's readings passed the test. Mismatches required odor confessions under a village tree, where each had to admit recent jealous thoughts in front of assembled kin. The ordeal was as embarrassing as it sounds, yet oddly effective at revealing unspoken resentments. Fungal foot, tender kisses. Finally, a ritual so grotesque it tested even the hardiest souls. The tender kiss of the fungus. Late summer saw mushroom hunters gather pouring cliffs of jelly fungus and bracket mushrooms. Lovers pressed wet fungi onto one another's soles, adorning each other's feet with slimy growths. After a half-hour soak, they gingerly removed the fungus and placed soft kisses along the damp, fungally perfumed skin. The ceremony signified overcoming repulsion to achieve tenderness. While participants risked athletes' foot and fungal infections, they insisted the shared experience united them in victory over the body's fallibilities. Through these and countless other absurdities, medieval lovers demonstrated that intimacy required the courage to endure one another's filth, fear, and sometimes outright biological assault. Part 3 closes with a testament. In an age devoid of private baths, deodorant, and common sense, romance was forged in the crucible of foul smells, questionable substances, and unwavering mutual tolerance. Stay tuned for Part 4, where we reveal the final frontier of medieval mating hygiene, night soil serenades, bone meal love contracts, and the ultimate ordeal of plague ward handfasting that separated the devoted from the delirious. Love may stink, but true devotion endures beyond the stinkiest of tribulations. When midnight deepens and the stink of chamber pots seeps into every stone crevice, lovers once convened for the night soil serenade. Beneath flickering torchlight, a pair would perch on the edge of a raised privy bench, each clutching a rag dipped in fresh latrine runoff. As the piles of excrement gurgled below, the suitor would launch into a lamenting ballad, accompanied by the hollow echo of waste, crooning love's tribulations in a minor key that matched the chorus of rats scuttling in the pit. The beloved, for her part, waved her rag in rhythm, flinging salty droplets skyward as though blessing the performance. The ritual's climax came when both participants emptied their chamber pots simultaneously, creating a symphony of splashes that signaled their mutual willingness to share the deepest embarrassments of bodily function. Surviving this concerto of human refuse without a gagging or fleeing into the night conveyed a devotion so profound that villagers swore those couples never quarreled again, though evidence suggests they merely avoided privies in each other's company for decades. In the pale glow of dawn, the bone meal love contract awaited. Former suitors turned to alchemy to immortalize vows. Ground human and animal bones, bleached by sun and steeped in vinegar, became the foundation of a chalky paste. With quills carved from rib bone, lovers inked their promises directly onto each other's forearms. I bind my heart to yours, in life and in death. Then dusted the text with bone powder to set the words into the skin like a living tattoo. The brittle contract, pressed onto the flesh, hardened in hours, breaking its terms risked painful flaking and festering sores where the bone dust drew out the body's heat. A successful contract, however, endured through washing, work, and weeping, its ghostly letters fading only when the couple's hair turned as white as the bleached bones that witnessed their oath. Midwives remarked that contracted spouses bore children whose first cries sounded eerily like the grinding of teeth, a bone-meal echo of their parents' pact. When the great pestilence swept across kingdoms, a final and darkest rite emerged, plague ward hand-fasting. Couples venturing into the infirmaries of the dying tied their wrists together with strips of infected linen, sealed with blood and leech slime to symbolize shared fate. Suspended over tubs of brackish water and onion skins, they drank mugfuls of the ward's repurposed wash water, infused with hospital vinegar and the faintest trace of strangled hope, believing that if both survived the ordeal, their bond would be sanctified by exile from fear itself. The ceremony demanded a full day inside the pest house, where coughs rang like funeral bells and wailing filled every corridor. Some pairs emerged unscathed, heralded as paragons of devotion. Others carried the disease home, transforming their union into a final testament of love's perilous promise. Mothers justified the tradition, saying, "If you love me, walk into death's courtyard and let us return together. Otherwise, let your memory linger in the mists alone." Only the bravest souls dared the iron plague chalice. Forged from scavenged nails of coffin planks and tempered over funeral pyres, the chalice was rumored to filter contagion through grief. Lovers passed it between trembling hands, each sipping deeply from the tarnished rim. The first taste burned with iron and rot, the second sweeter, laced with faint whispers of lost kin. A shared toast before the chalice symbolized an acceptance of mortality entwined with affection, while most chalices proved mere superstition, often pitted with rust and clogged with coagulated blood. The handful that carried survivors became venerated relics, housed in abbey treasuries as proof that devotion, like faith, could withstand the Black Plague's assault. As the medieval era waned, these grotesque hygienes faded into the annals of folklore, supplanted by rosewater baths and scented gloves. Yet echoes of those rituals survived in whispered cautionary tales, of lovers who lost their minds in latrines, of skin eaten raw by bone meal symbols, of hearts bound forever to the dying. Their stories remind us that when love demanded vulnerability, medieval romances embraced it to the point of self-endangerment, forging bonds through a crucible of excrement, disease, and decay. In every grim ritual lay a relentless truth. In a world where filth and pestilence reigned supreme, the only way to prove your heart was to plunge into humanity's darkest refuse and emerge, however filthy, clutching another soul in defiance of despair.